Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Memories are strange. Every time I recall them, something shifts. Details move. And over the years, what once happened begins to sound like a distorted echo of reality. It's like playing the telephone game back in school. You whisper a secret to the person next to you, and by the time it circles back, it hardly resembles the original. I often wonder how much of my childhood differs from what I remember in my mind. How many details I change or even invent. I've come to accept that not everything is exactly as I recall. Yet one memory remains vivid, unyielding in its clarity. It is peculiar how the very memories we'd rather forget can linger so unmistakably. The memory I speak of took place in October 1986 near the small, sleepy town of Cedar Ridge, along an old stretch of Route 66 winding through the rolling hills of Missouri. I remember clearly the yellow dress with white polka dots that my strict church-going parents had chosen for me. The dress had long sleeves and fell well past my ankles. I hated that dress. It confined me in every possible way. But at the age of 11, we weren't expected to choose our own clothes. My older sister, Savannah, had just earned her driver's license and was determined to take her beloved '67 Chevy Impala out for a spin. Our mother reluctantly agreed, on the condition that I come along. Around 6 p.m., with dusk settling over the land, we set off. Savannah, still a bit uncertain behind the wheel, preferred to drive later in the evening so we could avoid heavy traffic. We cruised along narrow back roads and quiet side streets until we finally ended up on a lonely stretch of Route 66, bordered by ancient oak trees and accompanied by the distant clatter of a freight train rumbling by. For nearly an hour we savored the newfound freedom, the soft strains of country music emanating from the radio. We circled a roughly 10-mile loop between the small hamlets of Mill Creek and Pine Hollow. Back then, the road was nearly deserted, embraced by dense woodlands and quiet railroad tracks that etched the landscape like old scars. Then, suddenly, the engine began to stutter with an odd clack-clack. Savannah's driving skills evidently weren't enough to prevent what came next. After only a few hundred yards, the Impala coughed and died. We had run out of gas, and the next service station lay miles away. In those days, without any cell phones to call for help, we had no choice but to retrieve the gas can from the trunk and walk to the station. But the cumbersome dress made every step a struggle. After just 100 yards, Savannah noticed I was barely keeping pace. Without a word, she handed me the car keys and instructed me to stay inside while she went ahead. I locked all the doors and settled into the driver's seat. Through the rear window, I watched as Savannah disappeared into the dark. As a timid, frightened girl, I soon felt the cold tendrils of night crawl inside me. There were no streetlights, and since Savannah had set off, no other vehicle had passed by. Only the bright glow of the full moon revealed the silver outlines of a row of trees standing about 10 feet from the road. Alone in that ghostly silence, my fear grew. Everything was perfectly still. Not even the chirping of crickets could be heard. In that oppressive solitude, I tried to drift into a light sleep, hoping that Savannah would return soon. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and fought to push away the unsettling thoughts of a lurking shadow. After about 15 restless minutes, a sudden, icy chill shot down my spine, the feeling of not being alone, of being watched. I lay half-turned, my gaze fixed on the steering wheel, too terrified even to open my eyes. Finally, I took a deep breath, counted silently to 3, and peered into the rearview mirror. Nothing was there. A glance toward the driver's side revealed the same emptiness. "It's okay, it's all okay," I murmured to myself. No sooner had I offered those words of comfort than a paralyzing terror gripped me. In my mind, a sinister voice repeated, "Don't look back, don't look back, don't look back." My heart pounded and my body froze as panic took over. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. Nothing was really out there. But then, the shadow that had been covering the driver's side shifted. First, it seemed to vanish, then it reappeared suddenly. And then, 3 deliberate knocks echoed on the passenger door. The unmoving shape outside now stirred. Someone, or something, was watching me. With trembling hands, I turned around. "Hello," I stuttered, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness. A deep, commanding voice boomed from outside. "Aren't you a bit young to be out here alone, miss? Where are your parents?" The man was unnaturally tall, his presence almost superhuman, and his gaze, deep, impenetrable, and void of emotion, sent a shiver through my veins. "Miss," he repeated in a monotone, "where are your parents?" I'm with my sister. Our car broke down and she went to get gas. I can't leave the car because of this dress," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. A faint, almost mocking smile played at the corners of his mouth. "So, you're all alone," he observed, his tone laced with an unsettling amusement. Yes, sir," I replied uncertainly. "And when will your sister return?" "The nearest gas station is miles away. It might be a long wait," he added, his voice now creeping into the cadence of a predatory game. He pointed toward a dim blue light barely visible behind the trees. Yet, when I looked in the rearview mirror, no other vehicle was in sight. "But where's your patrol car?" I asked timidly. "Right there behind the trees," he replied, almost teasingly. "Have you never dreamed of riding in a proper police cruiser?" I hesitated. "I think I'd rather wait for Savannah. She should be back soon. Be careful, it's late. If I don't get you home quickly, you'll be arrested for trespassing. And your parents won't like that," he threatened, his words carrying an eerie promise of something far worse than a simple delay. A new fear gripped me, the fear of being taken away by this strange man. My instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong, so I hesitated to exit the car. "Excuse me, sir," I began as I reached to close the window. In that moment, he reached through the gap to grab me, and when I instinctively jerked back, my hand became trapped between the door and the window. A blood-curdling shout erupted from him. "You little brat, you've crushed my finger," he roared, his voice wild and uncontrollable. "I'm sorry," I whispered, sinking back into my seat as I hurriedly closed the window. Furious, he shook the door handle and rattled the car violently. "Open the damn door. Do you know how long you could be held for resisting?" He brandished something that looked like a baton, striking the roof and the window with it. "Open this door immediately, or I'll break it down. If you don't comply now, it will only get worse. I swear it." With another savage blow, a web of fine cracks spread across the window. I knew it was only a matter of time before he would force his way in. Okay, I sobbed, unable to overcome the terror that had taken hold of me. Then, in an almost eerie calm, he commanded, "Get out of the car and come with me to my cruiser." "Yes, sir," I murmured, trembling as I stepped out. "Come with me," he ordered, and I slowly began to follow. Deep down, every instinct urged me to run, but in that restrictive dress, each step felt like an uphill battle with nowhere else to go. We were only halfway toward the line of ancient oaks when suddenly the headlights of another vehicle illuminated the narrow dirt road. "Come on," he growled, seizing my arm and pulling me toward the trees. We barely covered 15 feet when loud, insistent female voices burst into the night. "Let the girl go. She's not alone. This man isn't a cop. He's a fiend. Release her, demon. God sees everything. Come with us, little girl. Run away from that monster." The voices grew louder and more insistent, and in an instant the man released me and melted into the shadows of the trees. "Run, little girl. Run as fast as you can before he returns," the women cried out. I bolted, my feet pounding the gravel, as my dress tore in several places. Soon, I reached a small clearing where an old white delivery van, clearly a community vehicle from the local church, was parked. Two women in modest, knee-length dresses shouted, "Get in, quick!" Shivering uncontrollably, I jumped into the van, where 6 dignified older women were already seated. "You're safe now, little one. We'll keep that fiend at bay," one of them soothed. "But my sister, she's still waiting," I whimpered. "We're staying with you, and as long as we're here, nothing will happen to you." Another reassured me, enveloping me in a protective hug. They repeatedly tried to keep me from peeking out the window, yet my curiosity got the better of me. What I saw haunts me to this day. The man, now moving on all fours, as if deprived of arms and legs, staggered unnaturally with pained, animal-like sounds through the dark. He appeared again and again, only a few meters from the van, before disappearing into the tree shadows. To distract me, the women began singing old nursery rhymes and spiritual hymns. Every time the ghastly figure reappeared, they lowered the windows and shouted clearly for him to leave. Finally, Savannah emerged on the deserted road behind us, clutching a gas can. Between trembling words, I recounted everything that had happened. Savannah admitted that on her way to the gas station, an inexplicable dread had overtaken her, and that she had nearly collapsed on the journey back. As she refueled the car, the women formed a protective circle around us. The eerie man stood motionless at the edge of the trees, barely more than a shadow, just 10 feet away, watching silently, his presence filling us with dread. Once the car was running again, the women promised to escort us home. We drove another half-mile before making a sharp U-turn and passing the spot where we had been stranded. Yet, as we continued, I caught sight of the man once more, this time crawling grotesquely along the asphalt, in a state so animalistic it defied explanation. On our way home, I kept a constant watch for the van of the women, fearing the ghastly man might return. When we finally arrived at our driveway, the delivery van had vanished. My mother was already on the porch, her eyes full of worry and tears. She had felt something was wrong. After I told her everything, she called the police, who took our statement. I thought I would never hear from that strange man again. But months later, a local newspaper reported on a missing girl last seen in a park near the spot where our car had broken down. Witnesses claimed they saw the girl speaking with a tall man in a police uniform. Even now, I sometimes shudder when I recall that night and the sight of that ghastly figure. And I remember the women in the van, how they appeared in the darkest hour, and then vanished as mysteriously as they had arrived. Were they angels sent from above, or merely brave souls defying the supernatural? The truth remains hidden in the shadows of my memory. It was a bitter, moonless night in a quiet Midwestern town. A town where familiar faces once roamed the sidewalks with the assurance of safety. I had been on a 12-hour overnight shift with the county sheriff's department, a duty that often leads us into situations both mundane and unthinkably bizarre. That night, the calm was shattered by a frantic call reporting a suspicious figure pacing from one house to another. The dispatch crackled with urgency as I drove through winding suburban streets lined with modest homes and neatly trimmed lawns. Somewhere, amid the routine reports of minor disturbances, this call held an ominous note. I arrived at the residence of the concerned citizen, a middle-aged man whose trembling voice and wary eyes told me that he had seen something he wished he hadn't. Clutching his smartphone as if it were a lifeline, he showed me the grainy footage captured by his Ring doorbell camera. In the video, the image of a middle-aged woman with long, wiry hair emerged from the dim light. She moved with an unnerving deliberateness, her eyes locking with the camera as if she were trying to communicate a dire message. For what felt like an eternity, she hovered outside a door, her pale face distorted by an expression that was both sorrowful and maniacal. Then, with a press of the doorbell button, her voice, hoarse, trembling, and laced with a maddening insistence, echoed through the recording. "Open the door. She needs blood." Her words, punctuated by a chilling laugh, reverberated long after the clip ended. I could still hear her voice in my mind as I stepped out of my cruiser. The suburban street, usually bathed in the comforting glow of porch lights and the distant hum of traffic, now felt like a stage set for a horror film. The man explained that she had gone door to door, yelling and mumbling to passers-by, even as she carried something behind her back that defied clear identification. The details were as scattered as they were disturbing. With no further ado, I radioed for backup. A patrol car and a couple of units were already en route as I scanned the street for any sign of her. As I circled the block, every creak of a shutter or flicker of a street lamp took on an eerie significance. Neighbors peered through drawn curtains. Dogs howled in the distance. The sense of dread was palpable. Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, a figure slipping away into the darkness. The mysterious woman had vanished from view, leaving behind only the echo of her ominous words and a trail of unsettled emotions. I retraced my steps back to the man's house. His description painted a picture of an inexplicable terror. A woman who seemed to exist somewhere between the living and the dead, her every movement charged with a supernatural intensity. The house, a modest two-story structure typical of our American suburbs, now felt like the epicenter of an unfolding nightmare. I couldn't help but wonder if this was the prelude to something far more sinister, a disturbance that would unravel the fabric of our once predictable town. The preliminary investigation revealed little beyond the unsettling footage and a series of disjointed eyewitness accounts. The Ring doorbell had recorded her pausing at several neighboring houses, each time fixated on the camera before delivering the same haunting refrain. There was no visible sign of weaponry or an immediate threat, only the charged atmosphere of a person whose mind was in a state of deep disturbance. Still, the police protocol dictated that we approach every situation with caution, especially when the paranormal mingled with reality. I began canvassing the neighborhood on foot, speaking to frightened residents who described the woman as if she were a ghostly apparition conjured from nightmares. One elderly woman, clutching a faded shawl, whispered about seeing a spectral glow around her, a sign, she claimed, of something otherworldly approaching. Each account added a layer of dread, a sense that this incident was not merely a case of mental instability, but perhaps a phenomenon that defied rational explanation. As the hours crept by, the call to action grew more urgent. Other units were deployed, patrolling the perimeter with eyes scanning every dark corner. The description transmitted over the radio, possibly armed and dangerous woman, sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned officers. With adrenaline coursing through our veins, we embarked on a grim mission that blurred the line between conventional policing and the uncharted territory of the paranormal. In the silence of that long night, as I sat in my car reviewing the unsettling footage again and again, I realized that what I was witnessing was not simply an isolated act of madness. Instead, it seemed as if a piece of an ancient, inexplicable puzzle had fallen into our modern world. And though I tried to shake the feeling of impending doom, I couldn't help but wonder, had we already crossed an invisible threshold into a realm where reason was overrun by the inexplicable? Thus, with each passing moment and every step taken into the eerie suburban maze, the sense of foreboding deepened, a harbinger of the terrifying events yet to unfold. The investigation escalated rapidly after that first call. By dawn, multiple units had scoured the neighborhood, their flashlights slicing through the darkness in search of any sign of the elusive woman. I recall vividly how the tension in our radio communications built from static whispers to urgent bursts of information. Reports started pouring in, another call of a break-in in a nearby home, yet again featuring the same inexplicable figure. The intensity of these events blurred the lines between routine criminal activity and an uncharted terror that seemed to transcend normal law enforcement challenges. After a brief exchange with dispatch, I set out on foot with 2 fellow officers to systematically canvass the area. Our target was a quaint neighborhood where manicured lawns masked deep-seated fears. Each home we approached was met with wary glances, as if the entire community were collectively holding its breath. It wasn't long before I noticed a glimmer of movement, a flash of pale hair disappearing behind a hedge. My heart pounded as I signaled for my partners to close in, and we moved stealthily, every step measured and deliberate. In one dimly lit cul-de-sac, we encountered an anxious resident, a young woman whose eyes darted around as she clutched her phone. She described the intruder in a hushed tone, recounting how the woman had stared directly into her Ring doorbell camera, her expression shifting from sorrow to wild fury. The details were almost too surreal to believe. According to her, the woman's presence seemed to warp the very air around her, a subtle distortion that lent an eerie quality to every movement. The description of her voice, an almost hypnotic, maniacal whisper, echoed in my mind as I tried to process the fragments of the encounter. Our pursuit led us from one street to another, each corner seemingly concealing more questions than answers. The city's police scanner crackled with new reports. The same woman had been seen fleeing toward an abandoned lot on the outskirts of town. We raced there, sirens wailing, only to find an empty space littered with remnants of forgotten lives, a stark contrast to the meticulously maintained suburban neighborhoods we had just left behind. Here, the atmosphere was charged with a kind of desolate energy, as if the land itself mourned the intrusion of something unnatural. While searching the lot, I found traces of her passage, scuffed footprints and fragments of fabric caught on rusted chain-link fencing. Each piece of evidence felt like a breadcrumb, leading deeper into a labyrinth of mystery and horror. My mind, though trained to seek rational explanations, couldn't dismiss the growing unease that something far beyond human comprehension was at work. It was as if we were chasing a phantom, a dark echo of a forgotten past that had suddenly resurfaced to torment the present. Back on the patrol radio, a sudden burst of static interrupted our coordinated efforts. A panicked voice reported a breaking and entering at a nearby residence. The call was nearly incoherent, but one detail stood out: the homeowner's terrified account of seeing the woman enter his home through the front door. The footage from his own doorbell camera corroborated the bizarre story. The same unnerving stare, the same chilling repetition of "she needs blood," and a fleeting glimpse of movement that could only be described as otherworldly. I joined a team that swiftly headed to the scene. The house in question was an unassuming, single-story dwelling that suddenly felt like the epicenter of an impending horror story. Its front door hung open, left unlocked in a manner that betrayed the hurried escape of its inhabitants. With guns drawn and nerves steeled by countless training sessions, my partner and I cautiously entered the foyer. The silence inside was almost oppressive, a quiet that seemed to press in on us from every shadowed corner. In that tense moment, I couldn't help but think about the implications of what we were encountering. Was this a case of severe mental illness, or were we dealing with a phenomenon that defied the ordinary? The uneasy answers to these questions were already forming as we advanced deeper into the house. A single cry for help, muffled yet urgent, rang out from upstairs. It was a sound that would forever be etched into my memory, a plea that seemed to come not just from fear, but from a deep, primal terror. We ascended the creaking staircase with measured steps, each one heightening our awareness of the impending confrontation. Every room we passed seemed to hold a secret, every shadow a hidden story. As we reached the top, the house's oppressive atmosphere thickened, and the air seemed to vibrate with a sinister energy. The stage was set for what would become one of the most harrowing experiences of my career, a moment where reality and the paranormal collided in the most inexplicable way. In the dim light of the upstairs corridor, I began to piece together the scattered clues of this nightmarish tableau. The woman's repeated refrain, her eerie laughter, and the almost spectral quality of her appearance suggested that we were dealing with something that transcended conventional criminal behavior. There was an otherworldly purpose to her actions, a message, perhaps, or a cry for help twisted by madness and despair. And as I stood there, readying myself for the unknown, I couldn't help but wonder if I was about to witness something that would forever alter my perception of what it means to serve and protect. The atmosphere inside the house grew increasingly suffocating as we searched each room with a mix of caution and urgency. In the master bedroom, where the first scream had been heard, we found evidence of a struggle, a disarray of personal belongings, a shattered mirror reflecting a fractured image of terror, and signs of hurried abandonment. The homeowner, a man whose face bore the lines of sleepless nights and hidden anguish, was visibly shaken. He recounted in halting whispers how the intruder had clawed at the door and pounded on it relentlessly just moments before the chaos erupted. His voice trembled as he described the surreal encounter, a figure whose eyes seemed to hold centuries of sorrow and a madness that defied understanding. My partner and I methodically secured the area, checking every corner of the second floor. In a dimly lit corridor, we caught faint echoes of cackling, a sound that sent shivers down our spines. The laughter was not joyful. It was a macabre melody that resonated with something disturbingly ancient and otherworldly. It was in one of the corner bedrooms that we finally found her. There, in a state of disconcerting calm, the woman sat upon a disheveled bed. The room was shrouded in darkness, with only a solitary lamp casting weak shadows on the walls. Her eyes met mine with a piercing intensity, a silent challenge that froze time for a heartbeat. On her lap rested a small doll, a child's toy now marred by streaks of blood. The doll, a symbol of innocence corrupted, was almost as disturbing as the woman's eerie smile, which held hints of both delirium and a cruel, unfathomable secret. She clutched a massive knife in her hand, its blade glinting under the flickering light. Every detail of the scene was meticulously captured in the stark contrast of light and shadow, amplifying the grotesque surrealism of the moment. In a voice that was both haunting and hypnotic, she repeated the phrase, "She needs blood." It was as if the words were an incantation, binding her to a destiny of violence and despair. For a moment, I attempted to reach her, to speak in gentle tones that might break through the fog of her derangement. I asked her, almost pleadingly, who she was, the mysterious figure who supposedly needed the offering of blood. But the response was not one of clarity or remorse. Instead, the woman's eyes darkened and her smile twisted into something that was part amusement, part malevolence. As the seconds stretched into an eternity, the room seemed to pulse with an energy that was at once intoxicating and terrifying. My partner's hand tightened on his holster as he watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of disbelief and readiness. We both knew that any miscalculation could lead to irreversible consequences. The tension reached its peak when, without any further warning, the woman sprang from the bed with a guttural scream that echoed off the bare walls. Time slowed as she lunged directly toward me, her knife raised high in a motion that was as swift as it was frenzied. Instinct and training merged in a single, split-second decision. I fired 2 shots aimed at disarming her by striking her arm. The shots rang out, filling the room with a deafening report that momentarily drowned out every other sound. She shrieked in agony as the bullets found their mark. The knife clattered to the floor, and for a heartbeat she seemed paralyzed in a tableau of pain and defiance. The sight was both gruesome and strangely mesmerizing. A woman caught between lucidity and madness, her body convulsing as she fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs and blood. The room, once a scene of eerie calm, now erupted in chaos as my partner and I moved swiftly to secure the area. We cuffed her, our hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through our veins. Even as she writhed on the floor, the woman's eyes burned with an unyielding intensity, a silent promise that her message was far from over. Amid the commotion, we noted that her wounds were severe. Blood soaked the sheets, and her cries of pain merged with the lingering echoes of her earlier laughter. In that grim moment, it was clear that the incident was not merely the result of a troubled mind. There was a darker, more enigmatic force at play, a force that compelled her to act in ways that defied both logic and morality. We transported her to the nearest hospital under heavy guard, where the corridors of sterile white and cold metal became the next stage of an unfolding drama. In the back of the ambulance, as I sat listening to the rapid beeps of monitors and the hushed murmurs of paramedics, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The woman's final look, a mixture of terror, defiance, and a hint of something unworldly, haunted my thoughts. It was as if she had left behind a question that would linger long after the night had ended. Who was she, and what did she truly need? In the days following that harrowing night, the investigation took on an intensity that bordered on obsession. The police department, unaccustomed to dealing with events that straddled the line between criminal behavior and the paranormal, launched a full-scale inquiry. Every detail was scrutinized. Footage, eyewitness accounts, forensic evidence, each element analyzed for any clue that might explain the inexplicable. The case quickly evolved from a seemingly isolated incident into a labyrinth of mystery, horror, and unanswered questions. In the briefing room at headquarters, officers and detectives gathered around a large table strewn with photographs, diagrams, and transcripts of 911 calls. The atmosphere was heavy with tension and disbelief as we reviewed the footage from multiple doorbell cameras. Each recording revealed a similar pattern: the woman's unblinking stare into the camera, the repetitive chant of "she needs blood," and that disconcerting smile that hinted at a deeper, more disturbing agenda. It was as if she were part of a ritual, an unwilling participant or perhaps a victim of a force beyond her control. I spent countless hours poring over the case files and re-interviewing the terrified witnesses. One recurring theme was the notion that the woman was not acting entirely of her own volition. Several neighbors mentioned that her behavior had an almost trance-like quality, as if she were being compelled by something greater than herself. One elderly man recalled an old local legend. a story passed down through generations about a restless spirit, a female apparition who roamed the night seeking retribution for a centuries-old injustice. His voice was quavering as he described how, long ago, a woman had been wronged so profoundly by society that her soul had been cursed, doomed to wander and inflict a ritualistic terror upon the living. This notion of a curse, of spectral vengeance, was echoed in obscure local lore, and even in some fringe academic circles. I reached out to a professor of folklore at a nearby university who specialized in paranormal legends. Over several interviews, he explained that the pattern of behavior, door-to-door visits, the insistence on blood as an offering, the bizarre fixation on cameras, had parallels in historical accounts of witchcraft and ritualistic madness. Although his credentials were rooted in folklore rather than hardline criminal psychology, his insights provided a framework for understanding the inexplicable. The professor suggested that the woman's actions might be a manifestation of a long-dormant curse, one that had been reawakened in the modern age by forces unknown. Yet, despite these fascinating theories, there remained a glaring enigma: the woman's identity and her true motive. Her past was a blank slate in the records, and her sudden emergence left no traceable history. Was she a victim of severe mental illness, or had she been chosen, unwillingly or otherwise, as an instrument of something beyond mortal comprehension? The police investigation was caught in a paradox, straddling the familiar confines of law enforcement and the nebulous territory of the paranormal. In our debriefings, some of my colleagues openly admitted that the case defied all conventional explanation. "It's like chasing a ghost," one veteran officer remarked, his voice low and laden with incredulity. "We're used to dealing with criminals, people with motives and histories, but this is something else entirely." The notion unsettled me deeply. I found myself haunted by the idea that perhaps the fabric of our reality had been momentarily torn, revealing a glimpse into a realm where the past, present, and supernatural collided in a disturbing dance. The local media had caught wind of the story, and soon every news channel and newspaper was abuzz with headlines that blurred the line between fact and folklore. Speculative theories ranged from government experiments to demonic possession, and while many dismissed these as sensationalist exaggerations, the undercurrent of unease was undeniable. In coffee shops and local bars, citizens whispered about curses and restless spirits, and the once placid neighborhood now seemed permeated with an inexplicable dread. In the midst of these swirling theories, one detail persisted in the minds of investigators: the small, blood-stained doll that had been found clutched in the woman's grasp. Its presence was an eerie reminder that, despite the overwhelming chaos, there were tangible clues to be followed. Forensic experts worked around the clock, analyzing every fiber of the doll's fabric, the origin of the bloodstains, and any connection it might have to missing children or past tragedies. Yet every test returned inconclusive, a mystery within a mystery, as if the doll were a deliberate message from another realm. I found myself obsessively drawn to the case files, rewatching the footage and reliving every moment of that terrifying encounter. At night, in the silence of my modest apartment, I would stare at the blank wall, the woman's face haunting my dreams. There was a sense of inevitability in my thoughts, that this case was not destined to resolve neatly, but rather to leave a lingering scar on our collective consciousness. And perhaps, in the end, that was the true horror of it all, a reminder that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, forever echoing in the darkness. The deeper we delved into the investigation, the more the case began to unravel into a tapestry of folklore, fear, and unresolved grief. The woman, the cursed doll, and the blood-soaked scene were all threads woven together by an unseen hand. A hand that reached across time and space to remind us that there are forces in this world that defy explanation, waiting in the shadows to be awakened once more. In the weeks that followed, as the community struggled to come to terms with the inexplicable events, the case took on a life of its own. The woman was taken into custody, and while her subsequent trial concluded with a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, the legal resolution did nothing to ease the lingering terror. Instead, her confinement in a state-run mental institution only deepened the mystery, as whispers spread about the strange phenomena that seemed to follow her every move, even behind barred windows and reinforced walls. The fallout from that fateful night was profound. Neighbors found themselves unable to sleep, haunted by nightmares of a woman with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. Local businesses, once bustling with routine, became subdued, as if the very presence of the paranormal had cast a pall over everyday life. The police department, too, was forever changed. Officers who had once scoffed at ghost stories now spoke in hushed tones about the inexplicable chill that would descend over them during midnight patrols, and the haunting echoes of that woman's laughter that seemed to resurface in the dead of night. I often found myself returning to that moment, the final confrontation in the upstairs bedroom, as if it were a specter I couldn't shake off. The image of her leaping from the bed, the frantic motion of her knife, and the subsequent 2 shots that had changed everything replayed in my mind with relentless clarity. I questioned whether those moments were a manifestation of a deep-rooted evil, or merely the desperate acts of a woman lost in her own tortured reality. The truth, as it turned out, was as elusive as the spectral hints of her existence. Late one evening, while sitting in the dim light of my study, I began piecing together the fragments of what had transpired. I re-examined the evidence, the forensic reports, and even the cryptic testimonies of local residents. There was a consistent thread that ran through every account, a pervasive sense of being watched, of an unseen presence lingering at the edges of everyday life. Even those who claimed to have never seen the woman spoke of feeling an uncanny chill and an inexplicable pressure in the air, a reminder that something beyond the realm of normalcy had invaded our world. In an attempt to make sense of the events, I returned to the scene of the incident one last time. Under a cold, starlit sky, I walked the quiet streets of that once ordinary neighborhood. Every creaking gate and every whisper of wind stirred memories of that terrifying night. I visited the house where it had all begun, the house of the frantic caller, and though nothing overtly unusual remained, the weight of the past seemed to cling to every brick and window. There, in the silent aftermath, I found a note scribbled on a piece of crumpled paper near the front door. The faded message simply read, "She is still here." The words struck me with a force that chilled my soul. It was as if the curse had not been lifted, as if the paranormal force that had driven the woman to such madness was destined to linger indefinitely. Back at the station, conversations among the officers turned somber. The department had begun receiving anonymous tips, cryptic messages hinting at unexplained occurrences in other neighborhoods, sightings of figures in the periphery of security cameras, and eerie incidents that defied logical explanation. One officer confided to me that, late at night, he sometimes heard that same chilling refrain whispering through the halls of the station, a constant reminder of the night that had shattered the boundary between the ordinary and the unexplainable. The psychological toll was evident. Sleep-deprived and burdened by the weight of our collective experience, many officers found solace only in sharing our fears with one another, each recounting the tale in hushed tones during late-night debriefings. The paranormal aspect of the case had seeped into every aspect of our lives, transforming routine patrols into vigilances against the unseen. and while official records categorize the incident as a case of severe mental illness, the undercurrent of fear suggested something far more sinister. A darkness that refused to be exorcised by legal verdicts or forensic science. In the years that followed, the case became a local legend. Documentaries were made, podcasts explored the bizarre details, and every new case of unexplained activity was inevitably compared to that night. Yet, despite the numerous theories and endless debates, one truth remained inescapable. The memory of that night was not simply a ghost story. It was a visceral, living nightmare. The unexplained terror of the woman, her blood-soaked doll, and the uncanny phrase that would echo through our memories had become a permanent scar on the soul of our community. Now, as I pen these final words, I remain haunted by the possibility that the truth was never fully uncovered. Perhaps the paranormal force that had driven her was not confined to that one incident, but was a lingering echo, a curse that might one day reawaken and cast its shadow over another unsuspecting town. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the world is draped in darkness and the only sound is the rustling of leaves in a cold wind, I sometimes feel that same chill creeping over me, and I am left with one terrifying, unanswerable question. What if the horror we witnessed was only the beginning, and the true evil still lurks in the unseen corners of our reality? I remember the night like it was etched into my very soul. I'd been a patrol officer in South Jersey for nearly 3 decades now, and I'd seen my fair share of bizarre calls, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that frigid late October evening. The air was heavy, the kind that made your lungs feel like they were filled with lead, and a low, persistent fog rolled off the Pine Barrens, swallowing the road ahead in an eerie mist. Locals always whispered about these woods, especially along the old Red Oak Pass, a narrow 2-lane highway winding through an almost forgotten slice of nature, where the shadows seemed to breathe. It was well past 2 a.m. when I found myself on that quiet stretch, driving my cruiser with the radio silent except for the occasional static burst. I had been on a routine, call-free shift, the kind where you find yourself questioning whether time itself was slowing down. The hum of the engine and the monotonous rustle of leaves outside were all that kept me company, until something caught my eye. Off to the right, beyond the sparse glimmers of my headlights, I noticed a peculiar red glow. As I drew closer, it became clear that the red wasn't the tail light of an oncoming car, but the reflection of one. There, in the tall, swaying grass, was a vehicle that shouldn't have been there. Pulling over, I observed the car from a safe distance. Its driver's side door hung open as if inviting me in, a silent plea for help. I recalled the countless times I'd assisted stranded drivers or those who had experienced mechanical failure, but this scenario had an unmistakable edge of dread. The vehicle's paint was dulled by age and neglect, its windows clouded by dirt and grime. I switched on my cruiser's dome light and left my vehicle, my flashlight gripped firmly in one hand while the other hovered near my holster. In these parts, you learn early on never to assume that things are as benign as they seem. Stepping cautiously toward the car, I could smell it. A foul, overpowering odor that reeked of decay and something unidentifiably rotten. It wasn't the typical scent of spilled coffee or exhaust fumes. It was like something had been left to fester inside. My heart pounded steadily as I edged closer. I called out a firm greeting. "State Police! Are you all right?" But only silence answered my call. The doorframe, bathed in the weak beam of my flashlight, revealed nothing but an empty interior that exuded a dark, unsettling aura. Determined to understand the situation, I circled to the opposite side of the car. What I discovered inside was nothing short of grotesque. On the passenger seat and scattered along the rear, I found multiple sheets of paper towel and crumpled tissues, each soaked in a deep, clotted blood that looked disturbingly fresh despite the chill of the night. I knelt down, inspecting the carnage, trying to reconcile the logical with the unexplainable. Had someone been injured in this car? Or was it staged to send a message of horror? My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, unmistakable sound. A slow, deliberate crunch of twigs on the leaf-littered ground emanating from the edge of the woods. I froze, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the darkness as I scanned the tree line. In that moment, a figure emerged, a person whose presence was as fleeting as it was inexplicable. The individual hesitated at the threshold of the forest, as if torn between fleeing and facing the consequences of what they'd done. Before I could even react, the figure bolted, dissolving into the thick undergrowth with an agility that belied human limitations. Instinctively, I radioed in for backup. I have a 1029 on a suspicious vehicle with possible human activity. I repeat, possible 1029. Request immediate assistance at Red Oak Pass, I said into the radio, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. The cold night suddenly felt even colder, as if the darkness itself had deepened around me. Every rational fiber in me urged caution as I revisited the car. The license plates were nowhere to be found. It was as if someone had meticulously removed them, leaving no trace of identification behind. Inside the trunk lay an unsettling darkness. With trembling fingers, protected by my gloves, I reached in, pulling out a bundle wrapped in heavily blood-stained paper towels. My stomach churned as I unwrapped the bundle slowly, the beam of my flashlight revealing a severed human hand. Its skin was a ghastly shade of pale red, the nails bitten down as if in a desperate struggle. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing to connect fragments of evidence with the inexplicable dread that was now gripping me. The call for backup had already set off a chain of events that night. As my cruiser's lights painted the surrounding trees in surreal shades of red and blue, I felt the weight of the unknown pressing in. I knew then that this was no ordinary case. It was a portal into something far darker than any crime I'd ever encountered. With every measured step back to the vehicle, I wondered, was this a warning, a lure, or perhaps an invitation into a realm where the natural and the supernatural collided? That night, I walked back to my cruiser with the memory of that severed hand etched in my mind, the overwhelming stench of decay lingering like a curse. I radioed that a possible homicide scene was in progress, and soon the flashing lights of backup converged on the scene. We meticulously searched the area, our collective flashlights combing over the forest floor. Yet the trail of the mysterious figure had vanished as though it had never existed. No footprints, no stray hairs, nothing that could tie that fleeing silhouette to the grisly remains in the car. As I sat in my cruiser afterwards, the weight of that night's events pressed on me like a heavy shroud. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had secrets it would never willingly divulge, and that some truths were better left undiscovered. Even now, as I write this down for the case file, I can still hear the echo of that unearthly whisper, a deep, resonant voice that came from the dark woods and refused to be silenced. Backup arrived shortly after my frantic call for help. Within minutes, fellow officers and even a K-9 unit had been dispatched to the scene. The bright, oscillating lights of the patrol vehicles cast frantic shadows over the dense canopy of the pine barrens, intensifying the surreal atmosphere of the investigation. We cordoned off the area, and I briefed my team on what I had encountered, a situation so bizarre and horrifying that it was hard to believe it could have unfolded in our quiet county. The team split up, some to secure the vehicle and document the grisly scene, and others to comb the nearby woods for any sign of the fleeing suspect. I, still reeling from the shock of the discovery, retraced my steps to the edge of the forest. The dense foliage was impenetrable, its thick undergrowth and gnarled branches obscuring any clear path. I walked slowly, every rustle of leaves underfoot echoing in the cold silence of the night. With my flashlight shaking slightly in my grip, I made my way deeper, determined to find even a trace of that elusive figure. The further I ventured, the more disorienting the forest became. The sound of my own breathing was drowned out by a distant, almost imperceptible murmur, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very ground itself. At first, I dismissed it as the wind twisting through the trees, but then I began to notice patterns, rhythmic, deliberate footsteps that didn't match the natural sounds of the forest. I paused, listening intently, heart pounding as the silence thickened. In that oppressive quiet, I could almost feel unseen eyes watching me, a sensation so unnerving it sent shivers down my spine. Back at the scene, officers were busy collecting evidence. Forensic technicians meticulously dusted the interior of the car for fingerprints, while another unit set up a temporary command post on the roadside. One of the detectives, a seasoned investigator with lines of experience etched into his face, leaned in close to inspect the bizarre details. "This isn't just some random act of violence," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "There's something off about all this." I couldn't disagree. Every instinct told me that this case was spiraling into realms beyond mere human cruelty. I radioed in, "Dispatch, this is Officer Miller. I'm heading back into the woods to recheck the area near the vehicle. There's something in these woods that isn't right." The response was immediate and cautious. Another officer was already on his way. As I advanced, the familiar crunch of footsteps reached my ears again, but this time they seemed to come from all around, as if the forest itself had taken on a life of its own. I swung my flashlight wildly from side to side, its beam darting across twisted trunks and dark hollows. Every rustle made my skin crawl, and I felt an inexplicable urge to turn and run, yet I pressed on. At one point, the beam of my light landed on something that defied explanation. A figure draped in tattered clothing, crouched behind a large oak tree. For a brief, suspended moment, our eyes locked. The figure's face was shrouded in darkness, but I could make out an expression of profound sorrow mixed with terror. I called out softly, "Sir, are you okay?" The figure did not move, only stared, and then it slipped away into the dark like a wisp of smoke. I was left questioning whether I'd imagined it, or if it was another victim of the night's cruel twist of fate. Returning to the perimeter, I joined with another officer who had been canvassing a clearing a few hundred yards away. He reported unusual signs, scratches on tree trunks that appeared deliberate, markings that resembled cryptic symbols carved into the bark. He handed me a small notebook filled with hurried sketches and notes. "These symbols, I've never seen anything like them. They almost look ritualistic," he explained, his voice trembling slightly. I scanned the crude drawings, feeling a chill run down my spine as I considered the possibility that the case might involve forces far beyond mortal comprehension. The forensic team's work on the vehicle revealed more disturbing details. The blood on the tissues and the severed hand were analyzed on-site with portable equipment. Preliminary tests suggested that the blood was human, but there were anomalies. Certain proteins and clotting factors were off. It was as if the biological material had been altered in ways that defied conventional forensic understanding. One technician confided in me, "I've never seen anything like this. It's like the blood is almost otherworldly." I was instructed to meet with the detective in charge of the investigation. In the temporary command center, a converted diner on the outskirts of town that now served as our makeshift office. We pored over all the collected evidence. The stolen vehicle had been reported only days before by a local resident from Hamilton, and its sudden appearance in the middle of nowhere was already a red flag. As we connected the dots, a chilling pattern began to emerge. This wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a series of unexplained disappearances and bizarre occurrences reported over the past few months along these very roads. Hours turned into an eternity as we debated our next steps. The deeper we delved into the evidence, the more surreal and unsettling the case became. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deliberately obscuring the truth. A hidden hand in the shadows that made every piece of evidence more cryptic and sinister. I spent the rest of that long night documenting every detail, every strange symbol, and every inexplicable sound that echoed in the darkness. The forest seemed to whisper secrets in a language older than time. Secrets that hinted at ancient forces lurking just beyond the veil of the ordinary. As dawn began to creep over the horizon, our search parties had found no further trace of the fleeing suspect. The K-9 unit, which had once confidently led us into the woods, eventually had to turn back, exhausted and without a single positive lead. The silence that followed was almost palpable. A heavy, oppressive quiet that made every heart in that command center pound in unison with the dread that had settled over us all. I sat in my patrol car as the first rays of sunlight broke through the mist, feeling a hollow emptiness inside. The case was locked in a limbo of unanswered questions. There were no clear leads, no fingerprints that matched any records, and an inexplicable lack of any coherent evidence linking the severed hand or the mysterious figure to any known individual. The paranormal nature of the incident was becoming undeniable. Even the detective, whose calm facade rarely cracked, admitted quietly, "This is something else entirely, like we've stepped into another realm." That day, as I drove back to the station, my mind replayed every detail of the night. I knew that what I'd encountered was not only a crime scene, but a crossroads where reality and the paranormal intersected. A place where human logic fell apart and the inexplicable reigned. The forest had guarded its secrets well that night, leaving me with more questions than answers, and a lingering, unshakable dread that I was about to be pulled deeper into its dark embrace. In the weeks that followed that fateful night, the case evolved into something far more intricate than a simple criminal investigation. I became increasingly obsessed with unraveling the mystery behind the stolen car, the severed hand, and the cryptic symbols carved into the trees. Every moment of quiet in the station was filled with restless thoughts and sleepless nights as I pored over evidence, rechecked case files, and tried to connect the seemingly disparate threads that now bound this case to a larger, inexplicable tapestry. I began by retracing every detail of that night. I revisited the scene at Red Oak Pass multiple times, this time accompanied by forensic experts and detectives determined to uncover any minute clue. Each visit only deepened the mystery. The forest, with its tangled underbrush and whispering leaves, seemed to shift in response to our presence. Every time we thought we'd found a lead, the woods would swallow it whole. A patch of disturbed soil here, a branch snapped there, leaving us with nothing but frustration and an unsettling sense of foreboding. At the station, I was joined by a special task force that combined local law enforcement with forensic psychologists and even an independent paranormal consultant. A man with a background in both criminal investigation and folklore. His name was Richard Rick Davenport, and he had spent the better part of his career investigating cases that defied conventional explanation. Rick brought with him a wealth of knowledge about the supernatural legends that had long haunted the Pine Barrens, including tales of spectral figures, cursed lands, and inexplicable phenomena. According to him, the symbols found on the trees were reminiscent of rituals once believed to be practiced by secret societies and even remnants of Native American mysticism. "There's an energy here," Rick explained in a hushed tone as we gathered around a cluttered table in the station's evidence room. "An energy that's both ancient and malevolent. It's as if these woods are a portal, and whatever lurks on the other side is seeping into our reality." Our investigation took on a new urgency when we received anonymous letters hinting at previous disappearances in the area. Accounts that dated back decades, even centuries. These letters, written in spidery cursive, described similar incidents: vehicles left abandoned, inexplicable bloodstains, and ghostly figures seen flitting through the trees. One letter, dated back to the early 1980s, detailed the case of a young officer who had vanished after reporting an encounter with a shadowy presence. The letter ended with a single chilling line: "Beware the silence that follows the scream." Each piece of correspondence, though cryptic and riddled with contradictions, lent credence to the theory that our case was part of an enduring pattern, one that blurred the boundaries between the physical world and something far darker. Rick and I decided to interview local residents who had lived near Red Oak Pass for most of their lives. At a small, time-worn diner in Hamilton, we met Marjorie, a woman in her late 70s who had seen more than her share of strange occurrences. With a trembling voice and eyes that had witnessed too many secrets, she recounted how, on certain nights, the forest seemed to come alive with eerie sounds. Whispers, soft as a lover's sigh, and deep, guttural growls that sent chills down your spine. "The woods aren't natural, you see," she confided. "They're haunted by what we cannot name. My old man used to say that those trees hold the souls of the damned." Her words, delivered in a thick New Jersey accent, resonated with the unsettling evidence we had collected. Parallel to our fieldwork, the forensic analysis of the blood and tissue from the vehicle's interior continued at the state lab. The scientists working on the case were perplexed. Not only did the DNA from the severed hand fail to match any profile in our extensive databases, but there were inexplicable anomalies in the tissue composition. A subtle, almost imperceptible luminescence under ultraviolet light, as if the very cells were infused with something otherworldly. One of the lab technicians, visibly shaken, remarked, "It's like nothing I've ever seen before. It defies every law of biology we know." This scientific enigma only deepened the paranormal aura surrounding the case. In the days that followed, a series of unsettling events began to unfold. Several patrol officers reported hearing disembodied voices during their night shifts, a low, resonant sound that echoed through the radio static in the corridors of the station. One officer claimed to have seen a spectral figure near the perimeter fence of the station, its eyes glowing faintly before vanishing into thin air. Another described a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature in the middle of a sweltering summer night, as if a cold presence had passed right by. Every report was dismissed as stress or overactive imaginations by some. But to me, they were pieces of a larger puzzle, a tapestry woven with threads of the inexplicable. Late one evening, as I sat alone in my cramped office, surrounded by case files and newspaper clippings, I felt an overwhelming pressure in the air, a silent, suffocating force that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I looked up at the clock, 2:17 a.m. Just as the memories of that night flooded back, the overhead lights flickered, and the sound of a distant, tortured wail echoed faintly through the halls. It was then that I realized this case was not just about a stolen car or a severed hand. It was about the very nature of evil itself, a dark, lingering presence that had seeped into the corners of our world, challenging every law of nature and sanity. As the investigation deepened, so did my obsession. I spent long nights poring over the anonymous letters, comparing the handwriting, the phrasing, and the subtle hints of ritualistic symbolism. I began to notice that each piece of correspondence seemed to converge on one location: a derelict farmhouse on the outskirts of the Barrens, a place long rumored to be cursed. With trepidation, I planned a visit, determined to find the missing links that might explain the bizarre occurrences. But even as I prepared for that journey, an unshakable sense of dread settled over me, an intuition that I was about to cross a threshold from which there might be no return. My nights became a blur of restless dreams and waking paranoia, each shadow in the dark a potential harbinger of doom. The more I dug, the more the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Was it possible that the forest itself had become a living repository of ancient, malignant energy? Every unanswered question, every inexplicable phenomenon, nudged me closer to a conclusion I wasn't sure I was ready to face. And yet, with every piece of evidence, the labyrinth of secrets grew ever more intricate, drawing me into a web of mystery that threatened to consume not just the case, but my very sanity. The day of reckoning arrived on a bleak, rain-soaked morning. The farmhouse, long abandoned and overrun with vines and decay, loomed on the horizon like a dark sentinel. Its sagging porch and shattered windows bore silent testimony to years of neglect. Yet, within its walls, I sensed the presence of something ancient and waiting. Accompanied by Rick Davenport and a small contingent of officers, I made my way through a narrow, winding road that felt less like a route and more like a rite of passage into the unknown. Every step closer to the farmhouse was accompanied by a mounting tension, as if the very air vibrated with an anticipation of dread. The building's exterior was covered in cryptic symbols, eerily reminiscent of those we had found etched into the trees at Red Oak Pass. With each measured step up the creaking porch, I couldn't help but feel that I was intruding on a secret that had been kept hidden for far too long. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with the scent of decay. Broken furniture, tattered drapes, and scattered remnants of a life long past were all that remained. I activated my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a labyrinth of hallways and rooms. Every corner held the promise of another mystery, another fragment of the puzzle that had haunted my nights. Rick, ever the expert in the supernatural, moved with a quiet reverence as he noted, "This place, it's like a mausoleum for lost souls." His words, delivered in a low, somber tone, only heightened the eerie atmosphere. As we searched room after room, we uncovered relics that suggested the farmhouse had once been a center for occult practices. Old journals, cryptic maps, and photographs faded with time hinted at secret gatherings and forbidden rituals. One journal entry, dated back to the 1920s, described nightly ceremonies intended to commune with forces beyond mortal ken. The writer spoke of voices from the void and an endless silence that swallows all who dare to listen. I could almost hear that silence echoing through the corridors as I turned each fragile page. The deeper we delved, the more it became apparent that the farmhouse was not merely a relic of the past. It was a living monument to a darkness that still resonated in the present. As dusk fell and the rain intensified, we gathered in what appeared to be the main living room. The storm's fury outside was mirrored by an internal turbulence, an unsettling mix of fear, anticipation, and the desire to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying. We set up our portable forensic equipment, intent on scanning the environment for any anomalies. The readings were inexplicable. Sudden drops in temperature, magnetic fluctuations, and faint electromagnetic pulses that defied scientific explanation. One of the technicians whispered, "It's as if this place is a nexus of paranormal energy." His words sent shivers down my spine, confirming the suspicions that had long plagued the case. In a moment of unnerving clarity, I stepped away from the group and found myself drawn to a narrow staircase leading to the basement. The descent was steep and shrouded in darkness, the only sound the echo of our footsteps and the relentless drip of water from the crumbling ceiling. At the bottom, I discovered a cramped, candlelit chamber, walls covered in layers of cryptic inscriptions and bizarre symbols. In the center of the room lay an old wooden table, its surface stained with what I could only assume was the residue of countless rituals. Beside it, a weathered leather satchel contained what appeared to be personal belongings of someone long lost. Photographs, letters, and even a blood-stained handkerchief. At that moment, a low, guttural sound began to reverberate through the basement. I turned slowly, heart hammering, and saw in the far corner a shape that defied logic. It was a shadow, darker than the darkness itself, its contours shifting as if it were made of smoke. The entity did not move with the urgency of a fleeing criminal. Instead, it seemed to watch me with a deliberate, unnerving patience. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, though I knew deep down that no conventional answer awaited me. The silence that followed was more oppressive than any scream, an endless, suffocating void that threatened to swallow me whole. I stumbled back up the stairs, the image of that spectral presence burned into my mind. In the living room, the officers noticed my disarray. Rick placed a firm hand on my shoulder and said, "It's time to confront what we've been avoiding." With no other choice, we decided to conduct a final, all-out investigation of the farmhouse, determined to extract every last piece of the mystery before it could vanish into the shadows forever. As midnight approached, the storm outside reached a fever pitch. Lightning illuminated the battered walls of the farmhouse in brief, blinding flashes, while thunder roared as if the very heavens were warning us off. In a makeshift command setup in the main hall, we gathered all our findings, the forensic anomalies, the cryptic symbols, the journal entries, and even the anonymous letters that hinted at a pattern of supernatural occurrences. Piece by piece, a picture began to form. A dark tapestry woven through decades of hidden rituals, unexplained disappearances, and an energy that defied rational explanation. In one final, desperate bid to understand the nature of the haunting, Rick proposed that we attempt to contact the presence directly. "Sometimes, when you engage with these forces, you get an answer," he said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. We arranged our equipment in the center of the living room, forming a circle of light and sound. With a deep breath, I spoke aloud. "If there is anyone here, if you have a message for us, show yourself." For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then the lights flickered violently, and the room was plunged into an oppressive silence that felt as if time itself had stopped. When the lights stabilized, a single, blood-curdling whisper slithered through the air, a voice that was not entirely human. It said only, "The silence comes after the scream." Those words echoed in every corner of my mind, a cryptic warning that suggested our intrusion had not gone unnoticed. At that moment, every piece of evidence, every chilling detail, converged into a singular truth. This was not a case that would be solved by conventional means. Instead, it was a descent into a labyrinth of secrets, where every answer only led to deeper questions, and every revelation hinted at a truth too monstrous to comprehend. As the storm began to subside, and the first light of dawn crept through broken windows, we gathered our equipment and reluctantly left the farmhouse behind. The case files grew heavier with every passing day. The severed hand, the spectral witness, and the inexplicable energy readings remained unsolved puzzles that haunted the department for months, and perhaps for years to come. I often found myself replaying that final encounter in my mind, the words of that spectral voice lingering like a curse. Now, as I sit here writing the case file in my quiet office, I cannot shake the feeling that the silence was only a prelude. The farmhouse, with all its horrors, was merely a doorway to something far greater. A dark, relentless force that watches us, waiting for the next call, the next victim, the next soul brave or foolish enough to confront it. And as the rain gently taps on my window tonight, I wonder, will I ever truly escape the grasp of that eternal silence? It was a frigid autumn night in a quiet Midwestern town where the rustling of leaves and the occasional whistle of the wind were the only sounds breaking the silence. I had just finished my shift at the precinct when my radio crackled to life with a dispatch that would change the course of my evening. The voice on the other end was trembling, an unmistakable blend of fear and urgency. "Officer, there's been a break-in. I'm not sure what to do," came the halting words from a lone female voice. The caller identified herself as Emily Johnson, a resident of a modest colonial house on Maple Street, known for its neatly trimmed hedges and friendly neighbors. According to her, she had returned home after a long day at work to discover a shattered window on the ground floor. Nothing seemed to be missing, yet the evidence of forced entry was clear. The conversation grew even more unnerving when Emily mentioned hearing footsteps echoing through the darkened hallways, a sound that made her blood run cold. Moments later, the line cut off abruptly, leaving a haunting silence that resonated in my ears. I grabbed my gear and sped toward Maple Street, my mind racing through standard police protocol even as an inexplicable chill began to settle in. As I approached the quaint home, the details painted a picture of suburban normalcy juxtaposed against the disquieting event. The porch light flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows along the pathway. I knocked on the front door repeatedly, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. When the door did not budge, I rang the doorbell, and then, in a final attempt to rouse any occupant, I pounded loudly. Each call was met with silence. Determined to get answers, I circled the building and discovered the source of the disturbance. A broken window, its jagged edges a testament to the force used to breach it. The pane was wide enough for someone to crawl through, or perhaps something else entirely. With measured caution, I peered into the dim interior and called out, "It's the police!" My voice seemed to vanish into the darkness without a reply. My internal alarm bells were ringing. I radioed back to dispatch, noting that the house was eerily silent and that I would be entering through the broken window to get a better look. The static of the radio was the only sound as I climbed through the gap, careful to avoid the scattered, dangerous shards of glass that littered the threshold. Inside, the kitchen was bathed in the ghostly light of the moon filtering through the debris of the broken window. I drew my service weapon and advanced, each step deliberate and echoing over the crunch of shattered glass under my boots. "This is Officer Ramirez. I'm on scene," I announced over the radio, my voice steady despite the growing tension. Yet not a single sound, no furtive shuffle, no whispered reply, answered me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that I was being observed by unseen eyes. Recalling the distressing details from Emily's call, I made my way upstairs. The creaking of the wooden steps was unnervingly loud in the silence of the house. The hallway was dimly lit by the natural glow of moonlight filtering through half-drawn curtains, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance at the periphery of my vision. With my heart pounding, I called out, "Ma'am, it's a police officer." "Are you here?" The only answer was a faint, trembling "yes," coming from a room at the far end of the hall. Pushing open the door, I found Emily sitting on the edge of her bed, the soft glow of the moon illuminating her tear-stained face and wide, haunted eyes. Though she claimed to be physically unharmed, her voice quavered as she murmured, "I'm fine. I just—" Her sentence broke off, trailing into a choked whisper. The air in the room was heavy, and the natural light revealed every line of fear etched on her face. I explained that I was there in response to her call, and gently inquired why she had hung up and ignored the subsequent callbacks. Her eyes darted around the room before she stuttered, "No one is here. Please don't hurt me." In that moment, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The room seemed to tighten around us as if concealing secrets. I noted her subtle glances toward the darkened closet and the ominous space beneath the bed. There was an unspoken tension, a silent acknowledgement that something was amiss. In an effort to regain control and instill a semblance of order, I tried to reassure her. "Ma'am, I'm here to help. I just need you to sign this report confirming that I was here and that nothing appears out of place." The suggestion, while routine, did little to dispel the heavy dread that filled the room. As Emily slowly rose from her bed, I couldn't help but feel that her movements were not entirely her own. A hesitation in her steps that betrayed an underlying terror. It was then that a deep, disconcerting sound reached my ears, a subtle clink from under the bed. I directed my flashlight downward, and my gaze met something that defied explanation. A dark, indistinct shape was shifting slowly, emerging from the abyss beneath the bed. I barked, "Come out from under the bed," in a voice that brooked no argument. The figure hesitated, its form wavering like a shadow caught between worlds. "Hands up and drop any weapon," I commanded, my voice laced with a mix of authority and disbelief. The sound of metal clattering to the floor confirmed that the figure had indeed been armed. A discarded firearm now lying on the cold, hard floor. The emerging silhouette gradually took on the appearance of a middle-aged man clad entirely in black, his vacant eyes reflecting a soul seemingly lost to some dark force. There was something otherworldly about his presence, an unsettling aura that blurred the line between human and specter. In that harrowing moment, every instinct in me screamed to arrest the intruder. With practiced precision, I detained him on the spot, ordering him to stand down as I guided him outside into the chilly night. The distant wail of sirens signaled that backup was finally arriving. Yet I couldn't shake the unnerving realization that what had just transpired defied conventional explanation. Emily's earlier actions, her abrupt disconnection and her cryptic assurances, suddenly took on a new, more sinister meaning. Later, as I sat in my patrol car with the suspect in custody, the pieces of the night's events began to form a disquieting mosaic in my mind. The evidence pointed not merely to a typical burglary, or an intruder desperate for escape, but to an inexplicable force lurking at the threshold of the known world. A force that perhaps had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Even as the night deepened and the flashing lights of the arriving officers painted the street with streaks of red and blue, the case file in my mind was already replete with questions that defied easy answers. What compelled Emily to act in such a peculiar manner? Was the man truly an intruder, or was he a pawn of something far more enigmatic? And above all, what was the nature of that creeping presence? The palpable sense of dread that had permeated the very walls of the house. The hours following the initial arrest were spent in a haze of interrogations and paperwork, yet the events of that unnerving night refused to recede from my thoughts. The suspect, who now sat in a stark interrogation room under the unyielding glare of fluorescent lights, was a man whose name did little to provide context: Calvin Monroe. His eyes, however, told a story of profound despair and a haunting detachment from reality. He was not the archetypal criminal. There was a weight in his silence that suggested a connection to something much darker than any ordinary break-in. I spent hours questioning him, trying to piece together his version of the events. His voice was low and measured, almost as if he were reciting a long-forgotten tale. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he began, his words punctuated by long pauses. "I was drawn here by something I couldn't ignore." His eyes darted around the room, as if expecting the very shadows to speak. Despite the steady flow of my questions, he offered only fragmented statements, a jumble of disjointed memories and cryptic references to voices that beckoned him from the depths of the darkness. As I left the interrogation room, the chill of the precinct's halls did little to warm the cold dread inside me. I knew that what we had encountered was not a simple case of burglary gone wrong. The palpable energy of that night, its surreal quality and the unexplained presence under the bed, had left an indelible mark on my psyche. I began delving into old records, searching for any precedent to such an incident. Late into the night, in the quiet solitude of the evidence room, I uncovered whispers of similar occurrences, a pattern of inexplicable events in small towns, tales of spectral figures and eerie encounters that had long been dismissed as urban legends. Returning to the scene of the incident a few days later, I found that the house on Maple Street had assumed an air of desolation. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about strange lights flickering behind the curtains and unsettling sounds echoing from within, even on nights when the wind was still. The local paper had run a short article, treating the event as an isolated case of home invasion. But those who had lived in the area for decades knew better. There was an undercurrent of mystery in the town's history, a shadowy legacy of unexplained phenomena. In a quiet interview with Emily, who now sat in the safety of her living room surrounded by concerned family members, I probed further into her recollections of that harrowing night. Her eyes were distant as she recounted every moment, every inexplicable detail. "It wasn't just a man," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "It was like he was not entirely there. I felt something else, something that was watching both of us." The tremor in her voice was unmistakable, a blend of fear and a lingering sense of violation, as if an unseen presence had invaded not just her home, but her very mind. As days turned into weeks, the case grew colder on the surface, but I found myself drawn deeper into the labyrinth of paranormal possibilities. I met with other officers who had encountered similar inexplicable events, a pattern of strange occurrences in homes that once seemed perfectly ordinary. We exchanged stories over coffee in the break room at the precinct, each tale more surreal than the last. One veteran officer recalled an incident in which a suspect's eyes glowed unnaturally in the dark, while another spoke of inexplicable sounds that seemed to come from nowhere. Late one stormy evening, as rain pounded against the windows of my modest apartment, I received an anonymous envelope containing an old, faded photograph of the Maple Street house. In the background of the image, barely visible, was a figure standing in a doorway, its eyes hidden in shadow, its presence exuding an aura of menace. The photograph was dated over 50 years ago. Was it possible that this house, and perhaps the entire town, was haunted by echoes of a past long forgotten? The mystery deepened, and my determination to uncover the truth grew stronger. I revisited the precinct's archives and uncovered a series of unsolved cases from the 1960s and 1970s, all involving inexplicable home invasions, mysterious disappearances, and spectral sightings. Many of these incidents had been written off as the ravings of the superstitious, but now, in light of what had transpired on that fateful night, they took on an entirely new dimension. The threads of these old cases wove a tapestry of fear, one that seemed to stretch back into the very fabric of our community's history. One particularly chilling case involved a similar break-in at a farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Witnesses had described hearing footsteps that didn't belong to any human, and seeing fleeting images of a dark figure lurking in the background. The victim, much like Emily, had been too terrified to provide a coherent account of the intruder's identity. Instead, she spoke of an oppressive presence, a shadow that seemed to emanate pure malice. The uncanny parallels between that incident and the Maple Street event could no longer be ignored. Late one night, compelled by a mixture of professional duty and personal obsession, I returned once more to the scene at Maple Street. The house, now cloaked in a heavy fog that blurred the line between reality and nightmare, loomed before me like a relic from another era. Inside, every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of the wind seemed laden with meaning. I meticulously combed through each room, looking for any sign, a misplaced object, a hidden clue that might unravel the mystery. In the dim light of a single flickering bulb, I noticed strange symbols etched into the wooden frame of the broken window. Symbols that I later discovered bore a resemblance to ancient sigils tied to occult practices. My investigation led me to consult with local historians, and even a retired detective who had spent years studying unsolved paranormal cases. Each conversation only added to the layers of intrigue. "There's a history to this place," the old detective had murmured gravely. "A history of secrets and darkness that many would rather forget." The more I learned, the more it became clear that the event on Maple Street was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of inexplicable happenings that had haunted our community for decades. The deeper I dug, the more I began to question the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural. Was it possible that somewhere between the tangible world of law enforcement and the intangible realm of the unknown, there existed a bridge, a gateway through which a malevolent force could pass? My thoughts often returned to that chilling moment when I had commanded the intruder to come out from under the bed. The image of his hollow, haunted eyes and the eerie calm with which he had emerged from the darkness remained seared into my memory. It was as if he were an emissary from a realm that defied logic, a messenger of a horror that lurked just beyond the veil of our understanding. As I pieced together the fragmented testimonies, the spectral photograph, and the historical records, a disquieting theory began to take shape. The paranormal elements of the case, the spectral figure, the strange symbols, and the inexplicable memories suggested that the true intruder might not have been a conventional criminal at all. Instead, it seemed that a dark, supernatural force had found a foothold in our world, using the guise of a break-in to hide its true intent. This revelation was as terrifying as it was inexplicable. Now, with the investigation seemingly at a standstill, and the official records marking the Maple Street incident as a bizarre anomaly, I was left with more questions than answers. What exactly had drawn Calvin Monroe, and perhaps countless others, to these haunted thresholds? And what role did the seemingly innocent suburban homes play in this shadowy narrative? The deeper I delved, the more I felt the pull of an unseen, malignant force that lurked in the forgotten corners of our collective memory. One final, unsettling detail haunted my every thought. The possibility that the house on Maple Street might still be a portal, a place where the boundaries between our world and the realm of the paranormal were perilously thin. Even as I filed my report and documented every piece of evidence, I couldn't shake the notion that something was watching, waiting for the next opportunity to step through. The investigation remains open, shrouded in mystery and unanswered questions. I continue my search for truth, driven by a commitment to protect the innocent and a relentless need to understand the forces at play. But as each new lead unfolds, I am left with the chilling realization that some mysteries may be too vast, too dark, and too deeply woven into the fabric of our history to ever be fully unraveled. It was a night when the darkness seemed to seep into every crevice of the city. A chill wind whispered secrets through the streets of a quiet suburban neighborhood in upstate New York. Officer Michael "Mike" Harlan, a seasoned policeman with a calm yet resolute demeanor, was on his usual night shift. Alongside his longtime partner, Steve Donovan, both of them veterans of military service, their minds were trained to handle the unexpected. However, nothing in their years of service had prepared them for the call that would soon shatter the veneer of routine. The pager in Mike's pocket vibrated with a static-laden urgency that pierced the silence of the night. Unit 17, respond to Crescent Heights Apartments. Disturbance report, possible domestic issue. The dispatch crackled over the radio. Crescent Heights was a sprawling apartment complex known for its mix of families, transient residents, and the occasional odd complaint that most nights were brushed off as mere eccentricities of urban life. But tonight, something was off. There was an unsettling aura about the call, a low murmur of dread that had an almost otherworldly quality. Mike and Steve hopped into their patrol car, a well-worn cruiser with a history of its own, and sped down the rain-slicked streets, the flashing red and blue lights casting erratic shadows over the pavement. As they approached Crescent Heights, a sense of foreboding took hold. The apartment complex was bathed in the dim glow of streetlights, the surrounding lawns overrun with dew and an inexplicable congregation of residents. A huddle of figures clustered near the entrance, their hushed voices carrying a mix of fear and anxious speculation. Stepping out of the vehicle, Mike adjusted his uniform, its creases and badges a testament to years of service and the burdens of witnessing humanity at its most vulnerable. The duo met Mr. Jenkins, the complex's landlord, a jittery, middle-aged man with worry etched into his every line. In a rushed tone, he explained that one of his tenants, a man named Adam, had been causing a commotion. "I keep getting calls about him," Mr. Jenkins stammered. "He's been acting strange. I saw water spilling out from his door. I thought it was just a leak, but it seems like there's more to it." There was something in Mr. Jenkins' eyes, a mixture of concern and helplessness, that made both officers exchange a brief, knowing glance. Crescent Heights, with its aging infrastructure and myriad of forgotten secrets, was no stranger to minor disturbances, but this was different. The sound of running water was unmistakable. It was not the soft drip of a faulty faucet, but a constant, overwhelming roar that hinted at hours of uncontrolled flooding. As Mike and Steve entered the building, they were greeted by an eerie silence, punctuated only by the relentless gushing of water cascading down the staircase. The hallways, usually adorned with photographs of smiling residents and pastel-colored bulletin boards, were transformed into an unsettling canvas of chaos. The water, unrestrained and merciless, was swallowing the space whole. Despite the surreal nature of the scene, both officers maintained a professional demeanor. Their eyes scanned every detail, every shadow, as if expecting the night itself to come alive. Ascending the staircase, the sound grew louder with every step, each splash echoing against the worn wallpaper and dented metal. The corridor leading to Adam's apartment was bathed in a ghostly light from the overhead fluorescence that flickered sporadically. With measured caution, they reached the door where the torrent of water was most intense. Mike knocked firmly, his voice steady as he called out, "Adam, it's the police." "Are you all right?" Seconds ticked by with no answer, then another, until the pressing silence was broken by the sound of creaking wood. It was clear to both officers that whatever was unfolding behind that door was not a mere domestic disturbance, but something that defied explanation. In military training and years on the force, they had learned that intuition was as critical as evidence. Their instincts told them that this was a situation where standard procedures would be tested by the surreal. After a brief consultation, with Steve quietly checking his service weapon and scanning the area for any signs of imminent danger, the decision was made. They would force entry. The echo of the impact reverberated through the apartment corridor, blending with the continuous roar of water, a sound that, in that moment, seemed almost supernatural. The threshold had been crossed, and so began a night that would haunt them long after the call had ended. Inside the apartment, the chaos was overwhelming. Water surged from every source: sinks, the shower, even an exterior hose that had been hooked up for some forgotten reason. In the midst of the deluge stood Adam, a gaunt figure whose eyes spoke of an inner terror that was more than just fear of the water. His hands trembled, and his entire posture was one of resigned despair. It wasn't long before his voice, barely audible at first, transformed into a desperate, repetitive warning. "There are people in the walls." His words, soaked in terror, reverberated off the tiled walls, carrying a weight that defied simple explanation. In that moment, as Mike and Steve locked eyes with the suspect who was clearly at the brink of something unfathomable, the night's normalcy was irrevocably shattered. A single call had opened the door to a mystery that would challenge the boundaries between rational law enforcement and the inexplicable. With the storm of water as their uninvited companion, and the grim promise of secrets lurking behind every wall, they braced themselves for what lay ahead. A descent into a realm where every creak, every ripple, and every whispered echo of the past merged into a symphony of terror and intrigue. The following hours of that disquieting night unfolded like a slow-motion descent into an abyss of uncertainty. After the initial shock of Adam's frightened declaration, Officers Harlan and Donovan quickly initiated protocol, securing the scene, calling in reinforcements, and carefully documenting every detail for what was clearly not a conventional case. Crescent Heights, once a model of suburban normality, now stood as a relic of a forgotten era, with its worn brick facades, flickering neon signs of nearby diners, and the distant hum of traffic that belied the sinister undercurrent coursing through the night. At the center of this unfolding drama was the apartment complex itself. Constructed in the 1960s, Crescent Heights bore the weight of decades of change. Its once modern amenities now outdated relics of a simpler time. Yet, for all its age, there was an inherent dignity in its architecture. The tapered balconies, the muted pastel walls, and the intricate detailing on the entry doors hinted at a craftsmanship that had long since faded from modern urban design. Now, these very details became the backdrop for an unfolding nightmare. Officer Donovan took the lead in interviewing Mr. Jenkins in the cool, drizzly courtyard outside the building. The landlord's voice quivered as he recounted the events. "I've seen my share of odd behavior," he insisted, wringing his hands as if trying to rid himself of an invisible curse, "but nothing like this. The water, it was like it had a mind of its own." His eyes darted nervously to the darkened windows of the complex, as though expecting to see phantoms or creatures lurking within. Inside, the interior of Adam's apartment was a study in disarray. The high ceilings and open-plan design, once filled with the comforting clamor of daily life, now echoed with the hollow sounds of dripping water and distant, indistinct murmurs. The officers found themselves immersed in a surreal environment that defied logic. Amid the chaos, the flicker of a broken overhead light revealed remnants of personal belongings. A framed photograph of a smiling family, a cracked vase with wilted flowers, and scattered papers that hinted at a life disrupted by more than just water damage. As Mike led Adam toward a makeshift seating area in the parlor, The apartment's layout forced the officers to confront an unsettling detail. The walls themselves seemed to bear the scars of history. Faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, bore patterns reminiscent of an era when optimism reigned and every home was a sanctuary. But tonight, that same wallpaper now provided a canvas for eerie stains and shadowy shapes that seemed to writhe when caught in the flickering light. In an adjacent room, Officer Donovan's investigation took a more macabre turn. While methodically checking each door, he discovered a peculiar anomaly in one of the bedrooms. A faint, almost imperceptible line ran vertically across the wall. A line that seemed to outline something that wasn't meant to be there. At first, it might have been dismissed as an architectural quirk or even a poorly executed repair job. But as he drew closer, the line revealed itself to be an outline in the shape of a door. This was no standard feature. It was as if the wall had been modified, torn open by forces that defied conventional building practices. The discovery sent a shiver down Donovan's spine. He radioed Mike with urgency. "I've found something. A door in the wall. It wasn't in the blueprints." The static on the radio seemed to echo his disbelief as Mike made his way over, his expression shifting from cautious curiosity to profound concern. The officers exchanged glances heavy with unspoken questions. Was this a hidden room? A secret passage? Or, more disturbingly, an interstice where something or someone could be concealed? While the two officers deliberated over the mysterious door, the rest of the apartment continued to betray signs of its anomalous nature. The sound of water, now slightly diminished, took on a rhythmic, almost deliberate cadence, a pattern that hinted at a presence beyond the natural. The very air in the apartment was charged with a tension that felt both oppressive and alive, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation of a revelation. Outside, the arrival of additional officers and the steady hum of flashing patrol cars added a veneer of order to the chaos. Yet, even as the police force established a perimeter and began canvassing for further evidence, there was an undeniable sense that Crescent Heights was more than just a building. It was a repository of secrets from a bygone era, a place where the natural and the supernatural converged in the dark hours of the night. Every detail, from the careful collection of water samples to the meticulous documentation of the apartment's deteriorating condition, was performed with an awareness that they were not merely dealing with a break-in or a case of vandalism. This was a situation that called into question the very fabric of reality. Was Adam's outburst a symptom of a fractured mind, or was it the terrified cry of someone who had glimpsed an impossible truth lurking within the walls? By the end of that long, interminable night, Crescent Heights had transformed from an ordinary apartment complex into a stage for a mystery that was both profoundly human and disturbingly otherworldly. And as dawn began to break, casting pale light on the wet, glistening streets, Officers Harlan and Donovan couldn't help but feel that they had only just begun to scratch the surface of an enigma that would haunt them for years to come. In the days following that harrowing night at Crescent Heights, Officer Harlan found himself plagued by recurring nightmares. A montage of swirling water, flickering lights, and the desperate, echoing refrain of Adam's frantic cry, "There are people in the walls." At first, he dismissed these dreams as the residue of a stressful night on duty, but soon their persistence gave way to a chilling certainty that something inexplicable had been unleashed in that apartment. Determined to understand the truth behind the case, Mike returned to Crescent Heights alone, armed with nothing more than a notepad, his trusted service weapon, and a mind intent on unraveling the mystery. The building, now cordoned off and under constant guard by the local police department, seemed to have assumed an eerie stillness, a silence that was as much a part of its history as the worn-out bricks and rusted fire escapes. he began his investigation with a deep dive into the building's archives, meticulously reviewing old maintenance records, blueprints, and any available history of the complex. What he discovered was both intriguing and unnerving. Crescent Heights had been constructed in the early 1960s, during a period of rapid urban expansion and optimism. Yet, as he pored over faded documents and grainy photographs, he began to notice discrepancies. Records of unauthorized renovations, mentions of unexplained alterations in the building's structural reports, and rumors of hidden rooms that had been sealed off after a series of unsolved incidents dating back decades. These findings raised unsettling questions. Had the original builders been involved in some secret project? Were there hidden elements within the structure purposely concealed from the public? And if so, what dark purpose had they served? The answers, Mike suspected, might lie within the very walls that had echoed with Adam's voice. One particularly disconcerting lead came in the form of an old tenant's diary, discovered tucked away in a forgotten box stored in the building's basement. The diary, its pages yellowed with age and filled with frantic scribbles, chronicled a series of bizarre occurrences, a string of unexplained noises in the walls, shadowy figures seen out of the corner of the eye, and even accounts of residents disappearing without a trace. The entries were raw and unfiltered, capturing the fear of a generation that had felt the inexplicable creeping into their everyday lives. Each page seemed to hint at a malevolent presence, one that had been carefully hidden behind a facade of normalcy. As Mike navigated the labyrinthine corridors of Crescent Heights once more, every step felt like an intrusion into a forbidden realm. The apartment where Adam had lived, once a scene of frantic disorder, now lay silent, a tomb of water-stained memories and shattered hopes. The faint outlines of water damage on the ceiling and walls were like scars on an old veteran, each marking a chapter of a pain that had never truly healed. In a particularly striking moment, Mike recalled the spectral outline of that mysterious door in the bedroom wall. With a measured determination that bordered on obsession, he resolved to re-examine that very spot. The officer's initial discovery had been documented in rough sketches and photographs, but nothing had been conclusive. Now, with the benefit of time and a growing body of the circumstantial evidence, Mike felt compelled to delve deeper. He called in an expert on architectural anomalies, a retired engineer with a penchant for historical oddities, who joined him on a cold, overcast afternoon. Together, they scrutinized the wall in question. The engineer's practiced eye confirmed that the outline was not part of the original blueprints. There were no records of such an installation, no permits or mentions in the building's construction documents. It was as if someone, or something, had taken it upon themselves to alter the physical structure of the apartment long after its official construction. A clandestine modification designed to hide a secret passage or room. The mystery of the hidden door was only one thread in a tapestry of unexplained phenomena that began to weave itself around Crescent Heights. In hushed conversations with other tenants, elderly residents whose memories stretched back to the building's heyday, Mike heard whispered rumors of the extra room, a forbidden space that was spoken of only in the darkest hours of the night. One tenant, her voice barely above a whisper, recalled how her grandfather had once mentioned that the building was alive, that it changed its layout when no one was watching. Such tales, dismissed by many as mere folklore, now took on a chilling veracity in the face of the evidence. As dusk turned to night during his ongoing investigations, Mike found himself patrolling the now empty corridors of Crescent Heights with a heightened sense of alertness. Every creak of the floor, every sigh of the wind through a broken window seemed imbued with a portent of doom. He documented every irregularity, every whisper of sound, with painstaking detail, his notepad filling with notes that chronicled not only the physical evidence, but also the intangible aura of fear that seemed to hang like a shroud over the building. It was during one of these solitary patrols that Mike experienced a moment that would haunt him forever. In the silence of an unoccupied hallway, he heard a faint, rhythmic tapping, a sound that resembled someone, or something, knocking from the inside of a wall. Frozen in place, he listened as the tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if it were trying to communicate a message. The sensation was not merely auditory, it was visceral. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped closer to the source, the tapping echoing in his ears like the beat of a foreboding drum. In that moment, the boundaries between the physical world and a realm of inexplicable horror blurred into one disorienting reality. Mike's investigation into the hidden door, the diary's ominous revelations, and the inexplicable phenomena within Crescent Heights had now evolved into an obsession, one that threatened to consume him entirely. With every new discovery, the line between sanity and madness grew ever thinner. And as he pieced together fragments of a history long obscured by fear and neglect, he couldn't shake the lingering question: what was truly hidden within these walls, and what dark force had been unleashed on that fateful night? As the investigation deepened, the focus shifted increasingly to the enigmatic wall in Adam's apartment, the threshold of secrets that beckoned with a silent, eerie promise. Officer Donovan, who had been the one to initially discover the hidden outline, now spearheaded a detailed examination of the space. The room, in which the mysterious door was concealed, had long been relegated to the status of an afterthought in the chaos of the night. Yet now, it commanded the full attention of two experienced law enforcers who were determined to uncover its secrets. Late one stormy night, with rain lashing against the windows of the evidence room in the precinct, Mike and Steve gathered their equipment, a set of specialized tools, portable lights, and digital cameras, and returned to Crescent Heights. The building's exterior, illuminated by intermittent lightning, resembled a Gothic fortress, its architecture laden with the weight of untold history. Every step on the cracked pavement resonated like a drumbeat, heralding the coming confrontation with the unknown. Inside, the corridor leading to Adam's apartment was deserted, its oppressive silence punctuated only by the rhythmic pitter-patter of water dripping from damaged ceilings. With measured precision, the officers made their way to the bedroom where the hidden door was said to be located. The door, camouflaged by years of peeling wallpaper and water stains, appeared almost as a shadow, a faint suggestion of an entryway that defied explanation. Using a small portable mirror and a high-intensity flashlight, Steve began scanning the area. The beam of light danced across the surface of the wall, revealing subtle indentations and irregularities. There, where the faded wallpaper met a patch of discolored plaster, the outline of a door was unmistakably visible. It was as if the wall had been carved with deliberate intent. A secret door not meant for ordinary eyes. The door's edges were jagged, not the smooth cut of modern construction, but the rough hewing of something older, almost archaic in design. "Mike, look at this," Steve said in a hushed tone that betrayed his mounting apprehension. "This isn't just some renovation or repair job. It looks intentional." His voice was laced with an urgency that was hard to ignore. Mike leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized the markings. Every crack and crevice seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as though the door were a living entity guarding the secrets behind it. The officers carefully documented every detail with photographs and notes. Their flashlights revealed an unsettling texture on the surface, an almost organic pattern that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. It was as if the very wall was a canvas for an ancient, cryptic script, one that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. The realization was both fascinating and horrifying. Who had built this door? And more importantly, what lay beyond it? With the arrival of additional forensic experts and building inspectors later that week, Crescent Heights became a hive of activity. The police department, local historians, and even paranormal investigators were drawn into the mystery. Among the experts was Dr. Eleanor Reed, a noted architectural historian with a specialization in mid-century structures. Her expertise lent an air of scholarly gravitas to the investigation. "I've seen my share of hidden rooms and secret passages," she remarked during one lengthy interview, "but this is unlike anything I've encountered. The craftsmanship here suggests a design that predates modern building methods, possibly hinting at a purpose far removed from mere residential convenience." Dr. Reed's research led her to old construction records and obscure references in municipal archives. According to a faded blueprint tucked away in a long-forgotten file, Crescent Heights had undergone an unapproved renovation during the 1970s, a renovation that had been quickly covered up by subsequent repairs. The records mentioned unauthorized modifications and non-standard wall installations, but provided no further detail. It was as if the building's history itself was shrouded in a veil of secrecy, designed to keep its true nature hidden from public scrutiny. For weeks, the investigation into the hidden door evolved into a full-scale operation. Mike and Steve spent countless hours in the precinct, poring over historical documents, interviewing former tenants, and analyzing the physical evidence. They discovered that the area of the building where the door was located had a troubled past. Neighbors recalled eerie sounds and unexplained lights emanating from that wing of the complex, and some even whispered of a presence that lurked in the walls, a specter or force that could manipulate the physical world. During one particularly tense session in the evidence room, Officer Donovan recounted the moment he had first encountered the door's outline. "It was as if the wall was trying to speak to me," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "Every time I looked at it, I could almost see a shape, a form that wasn't there before." His words were met with a heavy silence, as if everyone in the room understood that this was no ordinary case of structural decay or vandalism. Late into the night, as rain battered the precinct's windows, Mike's thoughts returned to that fateful moment in Adam's apartment. The memory of Adam's terrified cry, repeating the same phrase until it nearly tore his voice apart, haunted him still. What if the door wasn't merely a secret passage, but a portal to something far darker? What if the people in the walls were not the product of a deranged mind, but rather emissaries from a realm that defied conventional understanding? In the final analysis, the hidden door remained an enigma. The physical evidence pointed to deliberate construction, a clandestine addition to an otherwise standard building. And yet, the inexplicable phenomena, the persistent sounds, the uncanny feeling of being watched, the inexplicable presence that seemed to cling to every corner, suggested that Crescent Heights was far more than it appeared. It was a microcosm of American urban myth, a place where reality and nightmare intertwined in a delicate, dangerous dance. With the door still sealed, its secrets locked away behind layers of mystery and time, Mike and Steve prepared for what would be their next step, a controlled, high-risk breach designed to reveal what lay on the other side. But as they set the stage for this daring operation, neither officer could shake the profound sense of foreboding. They knew that once the door was opened, the boundary between the known and the unknown would crumble, and the consequences could be as terrifying as they were irreversible. When dawn finally broke over Crescent Heights, it found the building shrouded in an eerie calm. In the days and weeks that followed, the atmosphere of that once familiar apartment complex was irrevocably altered. The high-risk operation to breach the hidden door was set in motion with all the precision and caution of a military mission. Officers Mike Harlan and Steve Donovan, accompanied by a team of forensic specialists and tactical support, prepared to confront the unimaginable. The plan was simple in theory: secure the area, disable any potential hazards, and force open the hidden door to reveal its secrets. In practice, however, the operation was a delicate balancing act between the rational procedures of law enforcement and the inexplicable dread that permeated every inch of the building. Under the dim glow of pre-dawn light, the team gathered in the corridor outside the apartment. Every face was etched with determination, but behind each determined gaze lay an undercurrent of uncertainty, a silent acknowledgement that what they were about to face might transcend the boundaries of earthly reason. The assault team approached the wall where the mysterious door lay concealed. With the precision of a well-drilled unit, they set up portable lights and carefully placed a series of cameras to document every moment of the procedure. The atmosphere was taut with tension, the air charged with a static energy that seemed to hint at an impending storm. As the lead technician readied the tools to dismantle a portion of the wall, a sudden, inexplicable noise echoed through the corridor. A soft, rhythmic tapping that resonated like a heartbeat from deep within the structure. For a long, harrowing moment, time seemed to stand still. The officers exchanged wary glances, their instincts screaming that this was more than a simple structural anomaly. Then, with deliberate caution, the technician began to remove a section of the wall panel. As the old plaster gave way, a narrow opening emerged, an opening that exuded an oppressive chill, as though the very air behind it were laden with centuries of untold secrets. What they found on the other side defied every conventional explanation. In the cramped, hidden space, 3 figures huddled together in unnatural silence, their eyes reflecting a cold, unyielding stare. Their faces, painted with cryptic symbols and patterns that evoked images of ancient rituals, bore an uncanny resemblance to depictions of mythological beings that had long been relegated to the realm of folklore. The figures did not resist, they simply stared, as if trapped in a trance between 2 worlds. The officers' training and discipline took over. With firm commands, they ordered the 3 individuals to step out into the light. There was no visible struggle, only a quiet, almost resigned compliance that sent shivers down the spines of all present. As the suspects were led away in handcuffs, a palpable silence fell over the scene. A silence that spoke of a mystery that was far from solved. In the aftermath, the investigation took on an entirely new dimension. While the 3 detainees were processed through the legal system, the more perplexing questions remained. Who were these individuals? What was their connection to Adam and to the hidden workings of Crescent Heights? Rumors began to swirl that they were linked to a secretive cult operating in the remote woodlands beyond the city. A cult that preyed on the vulnerable, targeting those with fractured minds and troubled pasts. According to whispers among local residents, the cult's influence had been felt in the area for decades, a malignant force that used psychological terror to ensnare its victims. In lengthy interrogations, the suspects offered little in the way of coherent explanation. Their responses were cryptic, laden with references to the Great Awakening and the voices behind the walls. Even as the detectives attempted to piece together a timeline, inconsistencies emerged that only deepened the enigma. Meanwhile, Adam, whose life had been irrevocably altered by that night, was given medical care and placed under psychological evaluation. His fragmented recollections of the events painted a picture of a man caught between 2 realities, one governed by water and sanity, the other by shadowy figures and whispered incantations. As the case made its way through the local news cycle, media outlets picked up on the sensational details, framing the story as a bizarre yet plausible episode in the annals of American crime. Headlines spoke of paranormal intruders and mystery behind the walls of Crescent Heights, and the community was gripped by a mix of fear, fascination, and disbelief. For many residents, the building had transformed from a place of routine existence into a living legend, a modern urban myth that defied explanation. In quiet moments of reflection, Officers Harlan and Donovan often found themselves returning to that fateful night in their thoughts. Late at night, in the solitude of their homes or during long drives on empty roads, the memory of Adam's terrified whisper, the rhythmic tapping from within the walls, and the ghostly figures emerging from darkness would resurface, each recollection accompanied by an overwhelming sense of foreboding. They wondered if, in the quest for order and justice, they had inadvertently opened a door best left closed. A door that bridged the mundane world of law enforcement with the inexplicable, chilling forces that lurked just beyond the veil of normalcy. The aftermath of the operation did not bring clear answers, but rather a lingering uncertainty. The hidden door had been forced open, and the immediate threat had been contained, yet the echoes of that night continued to reverberate through Crescent Heights and beyond. Whispers in the corridors, unexplained sounds in empty rooms, and fleeting glimpses of strange figures in the periphery of vision all served as a constant reminder that some mysteries remain unsolved. For Mike and Steve, the case would forever stand as a testament to the fragility of reality. A stark reminder that even in the well-ordered world of American law enforcement, there exists a realm where the paranormal and the everyday collide in a dance of terror and wonder. And so, as the city moved on and life resumed its tentative normalcy, the story of Crescent Heights lingered like a ghostly refrain, a chilling legend that continued to provoke questions, stir unease, and compel those who had witnessed it to wonder. What truly lies behind the walls? Who, or what, is waiting for its next chance to step into the light? Officer James "Jim" Calloway had been patrolling the backroads of Floyd County, Georgia, for nearly 20 years, and in all that time, nothing had prepared him for the night that would come to haunt his every waking moment. The humid air clung to him as he drove his cruiser along a narrow gravel road flanked by dense woodlands. It was a night where the usual hum of cicadas and the rustling of leaves seemed to whisper secrets of long-forgotten lore. Jim's route was one he'd driven countless times. Familiar turns, reliable landmarks, and the occasional solitary farmhouse punctuating the darkness. Yet, as he cruised down that lonely road, an unsettling sensation crept over him. There was an abnormal stillness, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. The only light was the pale glow of his dashboard and the intermittent flash of his headlights, which cut swaths through the enveloping darkness. It all began when he spotted a sudden fleeting movement on the left side of the road. A shadow, too swift to decipher, darted into the woods. In that instant, his pulse quickened. Without hesitation, Jim slowed his cruiser, switching on his high-beam lights. The beams danced over the treetops and undergrowth, illuminating nothing but the thick silhouettes of ancient oaks and pines. The figure was gone, swallowed by the darkness as if it had never existed. A mix of professional duty and instinct drove him to investigate further. He parked his cruiser on the shoulder and stepped out into the night, his boots crunching on the gravel. Every sense was on high alert. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, and his hand hovered near his holstered service weapon. The woods around him were both eerily familiar and disturbingly alien, as if the natural order had been subtly rearranged for reasons he couldn't fathom. Jim moved cautiously, his flashlight slicing through the murk. He noted the minutiae, the strange pattern of broken twigs, a faint trail that diverged from the expected path, and the overwhelming silence that cloaked the area. The sensation of being watched was palpable, yet there was no sound of life apart from his own measured breathing. Every step into that forested expanse felt like trespassing into a realm where the rules of reality were no longer absolute. It was then that a snapping sound, a sharp, crisp break of a branch, echoed from behind a massive oak. Jim's heart pounded in his chest. In that split second he thought of retreat, of bolting back to the safety of his cruiser. But his duty, tempered by a seasoned resolve, anchored him in place. "Show yourself," he commanded, his voice strong yet betraying a hint of the fear that churned within him. The command hung in the air, unanswered, until a figure emerged from behind the trunk. The individual was clad in dark clothing and wore a featureless mask that obscured any hint of identity. The stranger's movements were measured, almost ritualistic, as they stepped into the narrow beam of Jim's flashlight. The officer's training kicked in. Raising his voice, he demanded, "Raise your hands, remove your mask, and step forward slowly." The figure hesitated, complying only partially by lifting their arms. The mask, however, remained firmly in place. A palpable tension filled the clearing. Jim's mind raced with scenarios. A criminal on the run, an actor in a prank, or something altogether more sinister. Before he could issue another order, a low murmur of footsteps resonated from his right, a sound that was both deliberate and disconcerting. His instincts screamed danger. With practiced precision, Jim drew his firearm, his eyes scanning the darkness for additional threats. "Everybody, come out, hands up," he bellowed, his voice reverberating off the trees like a clarion call. In that moment, the night transformed into a stage for an unfolding nightmare. The masked figure on the left gave a furtive glance to the side, and then another figure materialized from the shadows. A second masked individual, this one carrying what appeared to be a menacing axe. The beam of Jim's flashlight revealed nothing but the cold, unyielding determination in the stranger's eyes. Yet, before Jim could even process this new development, the sound of approaching footsteps intensified all around him. Slowly, the realization set in. He was surrounded. Figures began to emerge from the dense forest, forming a near-perfect circle around him. There were at least 10 masked individuals in total, their presence an ominous threat in the otherwise placid darkness. Some carried crude weapons, a mix of axes and heavy clubs, while others simply watched, their expressions hidden behind masks that seemed to belong to a dark cult rather than any conventional criminal. With his back to the only exit, Jim's instincts flared with primal fear, but he maintained a semblance of control. The surreal spectacle was like a scene from a horror film, a scene that, until now, had only existed in whispered legends and roadside ghost stories. Time seemed to slow as the masked figures closed in, the air thick with an unspoken menace. The clearing, illuminated only by his flickering flashlight and the sporadic gleam of his patrol car's lights in the distance, became a crucible of dread and determination. Jim's heart hammered in his chest as he realized that this was no ordinary criminal gang or a desperate group of thugs. There was an inexplicable aura about them, a cold, unearthly quality that defied logic. And then, amid the stifling tension, one of the figures broke the silence. In a low, modulated tone that seemed both commanding and strangely melancholic, a single voice uttered, "Back off." The phrase was delivered in a manner that defied the chaos surrounding them, a whisper that resonated deep within Jim's core, instilling both terror and a bizarre, unsettling calm. In that moment, he sensed that he was in the presence of something far beyond human understanding. His mind reeled as he tried to decipher the meaning behind the command. Was it a threat, a plea, or something else entirely? Without another word, the masked figures shifted subtly, their collective focus turning from him to the dark woods beyond, as if they had been summoned by an invisible force. Jim's instincts screamed to flee, yet his professional duty held him in place. The silence that followed was as profound as the earlier footsteps, an eerie pause in the unfolding nightmare. In the days following that harrowing night, Officer Calloway found himself haunted by memories that refused to fade. Every creak of floorboards in his modest apartment, every rustle of wind through the trees outside, was a reminder of that inexplicable encounter. The world around him had resumed its ordinary pace, yet a persistent dread gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. A sense that something unspeakable lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. At the precinct, Jim's report was met with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. His colleagues exchanged uneasy glances as he recounted the events, the sudden appearance of masked individuals, the cryptic command to back off, and the overwhelming feeling of being watched by something not entirely human. While some dismissed it as the product of an overactive imagination, or the stress of years on the force, others couldn't shake the memory of similar whispered tales circulating among the patrolmen. Stories of inexplicable occurrences on quiet country roads. Determined to uncover the truth, Jim began his own discreet investigation. His first step was to revisit the site of the encounter. Under the guise of routine patrol, he returned to that fateful clearing on a moonlit night, armed not only with his service weapon but also with an assortment of recording devices and a notebook to document any anomalies. The woods, bathed in silver light from the full moon, appeared at once both familiar and transformed. A labyrinth of twisting paths and shadowed clearings that seemed to pulse with a hidden life. For hours, he wandered through the dense foliage, retracing his steps and observing every subtle detail. The ground was soft with decayed leaves, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. There was an almost palpable energy in the night, a low hum, as though the forest were alive with murmurs of ancient rituals. At times, Jim thought he could see movement just beyond the edge of his vision, only to find nothing when he turned his head. Every now and then, the distant sound of hushed voices or a stray footstep would send a jolt through his body. He set up a small station near the clearing, carefully positioning a digital recorder on a rock and leaving a camera on a tripod aimed at the darkest part of the forest. Night after night he returned, each time gathering a few more pieces of an enigmatic puzzle. Yet, the more he delved into the mystery, the more he began to suspect that the encounter was not an isolated incident, but rather part of a larger occult tapestry woven into the fabric of these woods. Jim's investigation soon led him to old records and local legends. At the county library, buried in dusty files and yellowed newspaper clippings, he uncovered tales of disappearances, strange cult sightings, and unexplained phenomena in remote parts of Floyd County. One article, dated back to the early 1970s, recounted a series of events eerily similar to his own experience, a string of reports by local law enforcement of masked figures emerging from the woods, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. The article hinted at an underground society rumored to perform ritualistic ceremonies in secluded clearings, their motives shrouded in mystery and fear. Haunted by these findings, Jim began to notice subtle changes in his own life. Late-night phone calls with nothing but static, shadowy figures glimpsed in the rearview mirror during routine drives, and an ever-present feeling of being followed. All seemed to be linked to that chilling encounter. Even his dreams were no longer his own. They were invaded by nightmarish visions of a dark congregation, their masked faces contorted in silent prayer as an unseen force directed their every move. One particularly restless night, as the wind howled outside and the clock ticked past midnight, Jim received an anonymous tip. The message, scrawled in uneven handwriting, read, "The answers you seek lie beneath the silvered leaves and the whispering pines. Beware the call of the night, for not all who wander return unchanged." This cryptic note intensified his determination. It was as if someone, or something, wanted him to dig deeper, to reveal a secret that had long been concealed by the passage of time and the dense canopy of the forest. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Jim encountered a local historian, Ms. Eleanor Pratt, who had spent decades chronicling the folklore and hidden histories of rural Georgia. In her cluttered study filled with maps, old photographs, and handwritten journals, Eleanor recounted accounts of an enigmatic group known only by whispers, a secretive assembly that had, for generations, operated in the fringes of society. According to her, these people were not mere criminals. They were custodians of an ancient, forgotten ritual that blurred the line between life and death, reality and the supernatural. Their gatherings, often marked by eerie silence and inexplicable occurrences, had left scars on the local community that ran deep and unhealed. As Eleanor spoke, Jim felt a resonance with every word, a confirmation that his own brush with the unknown was but one thread in a vast, tangled tapestry. The historian's voice, soft yet unwavering, described how the group had been rumored to meet at specific times of the year, coinciding with rare celestial events. Their rituals were said to invoke forces beyond human comprehension, forces that could manipulate the very fabric of reality. She warned him that delving too deeply might not only endanger his career, but his very soul. With each new piece of evidence, the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural began to blur for Jim. He documented eerie sounds on his recorder, a faint chant that could barely be discerned over the rustling leaves and distant animal calls. His camera captured fleeting images of figures that vanished before they could be properly identified. And in the dead of night, when he sat alone in his car, the static on the radio would occasionally morph into garbled voices that seemed to whisper his name. The enigma of the woods grew ever more oppressive. In the days that followed, Jim found himself unable to shake the feeling that he was being drawn inexorably toward a final, terrible revelation. Every mundane detail of his daily routine became infused with an undercurrent of paranoia. The quiet moments before dawn were spent rewatching the grainy footage on his camera and re-listening to the distorted recordings, desperate to decipher a hidden message that lurked beneath the surface of static. On one fateful night, driven by a mixture of dread and determination, Jim returned to the clearing for what he hoped would be the final chapter in his investigation. The full moon cast an ethereal glow on the treetops, and the forest seemed to breathe around him. As he neared the spot where the masked figures had once encircled him, a dense fog began to roll in, obscuring his vision and muffling the sounds of the night. His heart pounded as the silence deepened into a foreboding hush. There, in the midst of the swirling mist, he discerned a subtle formation of figures standing in a deliberate pattern. They were arranged in a circle, their silhouettes barely distinguishable in the fog, yet their presence was unmistakable. Jim's hand tightened around his weapon as he cautiously approached, every sense straining to capture any detail. In that moment, the woods seemed to exhale a collective breath, a silent, ominous welcome that chilled him to the bone. As he stepped into the center of the formation, the masked figures turned in unison. Their eyes, hidden behind opaque masks, seemed to glisten with an otherworldly light. The leader of the group, a taller figure whose presence dominated the circle, stepped forward and, without a word, extended a hand as if offering a benediction or a warning. In that single, unspoken gesture, Jim felt an overwhelming force of both dread and familiarity. It was as if the forest itself were communicating, urging him to understand that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. The night wore on in a slow, agonizing dance of tension and revelation. Jim could only stand and watch as the masked assembly performed what appeared to be a ritual, a series of deliberate movements that resonated with ancient symbolism and an arcane rhythm that defied explanation. Every gesture, every subtle shift in the air, seemed to signal that the boundary between this world and something else was thinning, that the time had come for a final reckoning. As the ritual reached its crescendo, a sudden gust of wind tore through the clearing, scattering leaves and shrouding the figures in a swirling vortex of mist. The moment was as fleeting as it was profound. Before Jim's eyes, the assembly dissipated into the night, leaving him alone with the lingering echoes of whispered chants and an implacable sense that the true purpose of their gathering was still waiting to be revealed. In the weeks that followed, the memory of that night haunted Jim's every waking moment. Sleep became an elusive luxury, haunted by visions of masked figures and cryptic rituals that played out like fragments of a half-remembered nightmare. The incident had upended the very core of his understanding of duty and the limits of human perception. Every call he took, every routine patrol he conducted, was now tinged with the unmistakable specter of that inexplicable encounter. At the precinct, Jim's colleagues noticed a change. The veteran officer, once the epitome of calm professionalism, now harbored an intensity in his eyes, a silent storm of questions and doubts. Rumors began circulating among the ranks. Some whispered that he had seen something that defied the natural order, while others speculated that the stress of years on the force had finally taken its toll. Yet, for Jim, the experience was indisputable. The events of that night were etched into his memory with a clarity that no amount of time could erode. Determined to find closure, Jim pored over every scrap of evidence he had gathered. The grainy footage from his camera, the warped audio recordings that hinted at voices from another realm, and the cryptic note that had set him on his path. Each piece was a fragment of a puzzle that refused to yield a coherent picture. The deeper he delved, the more he realized that the encounter was not an isolated anomaly, but part of a vast, interwoven tapestry of occult occurrences that had plagued the region for decades. Late one evening, as a bitter wind howled through the empty halls of the station, Jim received an unexpected visitor. A man, disheveled yet determined, appeared at his door with evidence that both corroborated and deepened the mystery. The stranger introduced himself simply as Marcus, a former officer who had long since left the force under murky circumstances. Marcus recounted his own harrowing encounter on a remote stretch of highway, one that bore an eerie resemblance to Jim's experience, complete with masked figures and inexplicable rituals. The two men spent hours sharing their stories, piecing together the chilling commonalities of their experiences. Marcus revealed that he had managed to secure access to confidential files from a long-disbanded task force that had investigated paranormal phenomena within law enforcement. The files were damning. They chronicled bizarre events, unexplained disappearances, and a recurring pattern of masked gatherings in secluded areas of rural Georgia. The evidence painted a picture of an underground network, a secret society that operated at the fringes of society, orchestrating rituals that blurred the lines between reality and nightmare. Their presence, it seemed, was not an isolated aberration, but an integral part of a dark undercurrent that ran through the region. The files hinted at connections to local folklore, suggesting that these groups might have ancient roots, remnants of traditions brought to America by early settlers who had mingled with native beliefs and superstitions. For Jim, the realization was both terrifying and inescapable. His encounter was but a symptom of a far larger malevolent force at work. Haunted by these revelations, Jim embarked on a personal crusade to expose the truth. Night after night, he revisited the woods, determined to document any further anomalies. He augmented his efforts with state-of-the-art recording equipment and even reached out to a local paranormal investigator known for his controversial theories. Together, they combed through the archives of local lore and combed the forest with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every rustle of leaves, every echoing footstep became a clue, a thread that might unravel the enigma that had so thoroughly ensnared him. One particularly stormy night, when the sky was a tumult of black clouds and intermittent lightning, Jim found himself back at the clearing where the masked assembly had vanished. The rain fell in relentless sheets, transforming the forest floor into a slick, treacherous expanse. In the midst of the downpour, he noticed something he had missed before: a series of strange symbols etched into the bark of an ancient tree. The carvings, worn but unmistakable, depicted a series of interlocking circles and obscure runes. They resonated with the same otherworldly energy he had felt on that fateful night, as if the very tree was a sentinel to the dark, ritualistic practices of the secret society. Armed with his notebook and his unwavering determination, Jim began to decode the cryptic symbols. Hours turned into days as he scoured old texts, consulted with experts in ancient languages, and pieced together fragments of lore that spanned generations. The deeper he delved, the more he became convinced that these symbols were a form of protective ward, or perhaps a means of summoning forces that defied conventional understanding. With each revelation, the sense of dread grew, as though he were drawing ever closer to a threshold from which there might be no return. As the investigation reached its fevered pitch, Jim found himself plagued by nightmares of endless corridors of shadow and cold, unblinking eyes staring from the darkness. His once familiar world had transformed into a landscape of shifting realities, a realm where the lines between duty and despair, rationality and madness, blurred into a singular, haunting vision. The paranormal encounters he had once dismissed as figments of an overtaxed mind now stood as undeniable evidence of a hidden terror, a malevolent presence that lurked just beneath the surface of everyday life. Then, one fateful night, as Jim prepared to leave the precinct after a long day of reviewing his findings, a final, inexplicable occurrence shattered the fragile veneer of normalcy. The station's lights flickered, and the familiar hum of fluorescent bulbs was replaced by an almost imperceptible chanting, a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The corridors grew unnaturally cold, and the air was thick with a foreboding presence. In that moment, Jim knew that the secret he had been unraveling was about to reveal its true, horrifying nature. A sudden, gut-wrenching chill swept over him as he stepped outside into the rainy night. In the distance, under the sickly glow of a flickering streetlight, he saw them once again. A solitary figure in a dark coat, mask obscuring every feature, standing motionless on the sidewalk. For a fleeting moment, time seemed to stand still. Jim's heart pounded in his chest as he locked eyes with that spectral presence, a silent, unyielding warning that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. With trembling hands and a mind reeling from the cascade of revelations, Jim knew that his life would never be the same. The paranormal network, the secret society that had long lurked in the shadows, had marked him as one of its own, whether as a target, a messenger, or an unwilling witness. As he watched the lone figure dissolve into the stormy darkness, he couldn't help but feel that the true terror was only beginning. The secrets of Floyd County, buried beneath layers of folklore and time, were poised to emerge in ways that would shake the very foundations of what he once believed to be reality. The sun had been missing for over a month, swallowed by an endless, impenetrable darkness that spread like a cold shroud over the small town of Frostford, Maine. Only the weak glow of streetlights and the monotonous howl of the wind slicing through snow-draped fields broke the oppressive gloom. Life in Frostford trudged on, as routine as one could expect in a place where winter's long nights cast everything in perpetual twilight. But during the winter of 1982, that very darkness brought with it an evil that plunged our community into terror. An event that would be documented in local newspapers and whispered about for decades. I am Detective Thomas Berger, and for the past 15 years, I have led the county police in Frostford. In all those years, I'd seen the usual small-town disputes, domestic quarrels, and the occasional mishap involving a lost tourist. Routine, I thought, as I drove alongside my partners, Detective Andy Schmidt and Officer Claudia Johnson, on the snowbound country roads. We knew our people, their customs, and how things were done in this frozen corner of Maine, until that fateful December that altered our history forever. It began on a biting afternoon when I received an urgent call from Hannah Summers, a resident living on the outskirts near the frozen streams of northern Maine. A region reminiscent of those documented in FBI files of unsolved disappearances from the late 1970s. Her voice trembled over the radio, hoarse with barely contained emotion as she fought back tears. "Chief, I'm sorry to disturb you, but something's terribly wrong. It's about Carl. He hasn't come home." Carl Summers, Hannah's husband, worked as a technician for a regional power company that operated an old heating plant on the northern edge of town. It wasn't unusual for him to be on call during harsh winter nights, but that day there had been no storm. By all accounts, he should have been home hours ago. Andy and I immediately headed to the power plant, our cruiser's heater struggling against the frigid air. The only sounds were the crunch of snow under our tires, and the occasional clatter of icicles breaking from the barren pines. When we arrived, Carl's company vehicle lay abandoned in the parking lot, its driver's door wide open. The interior was dusted with fresh, powdery snow, interrupted by dark, frozen streaks of blood. There were no signs of a struggle or of his presence, only the eerie, deliberate trail of blood that seemed to lead toward the frozen creek, much like clues in unsolved regional cases reported in the local press. Andy knelt beside the crimson stains, his gloved fingers tracing the path as he muttered, "What in the world?" My heart pounded as I crouched beside him. The blood wasn't scattered randomly. It formed a distinct route disappearing into the icy fringe of the creek, a detail that reminded me of long-forgotten, grim local legends. Armed with our flashlights, we followed the ominous trail. Yet, with every step deeper into the darkness, an increasing dread took hold. The path ended abruptly at the jagged edge of the frozen stream, with no trace of a body, only more blood, clotted into grotesque clusters and fine lines stretching across the ice. Deep, claw-like scratches marred the surface everywhere. What sort of creature or force could have wrought such devastation? And why had no one reported a growl or a commotion in this isolated part of town? Hannah pleaded with us to keep searching, but there was nothing more to be found. Carl had simply vanished. In the days that followed, more chilling incidents emerged. An experienced local hunter, a woman walking her dog, and another worker from the power plant all left behind the same grim signs. Blood and evidence of a vicious struggle, yet no bodies. The heavy snow and the relentless cold thwarted our ability to gather concrete evidence, and the mystery deepened, as though we were caught in a case that could have been lifted straight from the annals of American cold case files. We were no strangers to wild animal encounters in these parts. Maine's dense forests harbored wolves and the occasional bear. But this was different. The destruction was calculated, as if orchestrated by an intelligent, malevolent force. I kept this unsettling thought to myself, not wanting to incite widespread panic among a community already steeped in superstitions passed down through generations. Andy, Claudia, and I canvassed Frostford, urging residents to be cautious and advising them never to venture out alone after dusk. The tension was palpable. Neighbors recalled similar eerie occurrences from decades past when unsolved disappearances were attributed to cursed winters and local folklore. The shadow of fear crept over our town like a bad historical omen. I will never forget the day I found Sam Warner. Sam owned the only small general store in Frostford, a gathering spot as familiar as any local diner or church hall. A seasoned local who had weathered more winters than anyone could recall, Sam was known for regaling anyone who stepped into his store with stories of the town's past and local legends that blurred the lines between myth and reality. But when Officer Claudia noticed that Sam's store had been shuttered for 2 consecutive days, a rarity for a man known for lighting his neon sign at dusk, a chill ran down my spine. Andy and I drove to Sam's store, hoping to find him safe. Perhaps he had slipped on the ice or gotten disoriented on the lonely roads. The crunch of snow under our boots accompanied us as we approached his home. The front door was smashed in, its rusted hinges torn away by violent force, the impact having shattered the doorframe. An acrid mix of old blood and the sterile scent of winter greeted us as we stepped inside. Our flashlights cut through the chaos until we found him. "Sam! Sam, are you here?" I called out into the oppressive silence. In the back room, he lay slumped against a wall, or rather, what was left of him. His chest had been grotesquely torn open, the ribs arranged in a ghastly pattern against the pooling blood on the floor. His wide, vacant eyes stared blankly, as if he had witnessed an otherworldly horror. I later read in the local paper that his case would be one of the most baffling entries in the county records. Andy stifled a cry, covering his mouth in shock. "My God, what happened here?" he murmured, his voice trembling. I knew instantly that this was no ordinary animal attack. It was an act of calculated cruelty, as if a supernatural force had chosen our town for its gruesome signature. That very night, I convened an emergency meeting at the station. The officers exchanged hushed, fearful whispers about Sam's brutal death, Carl's mysterious disappearance, and the strange, bloody clues at every scene. The air in the briefing room was thick with dread. Claudia stood by my side, pale and tense, while Andy, rifle in hand, patrolled near the entrance, ever vigilant. "We still don't understand what's happening here," I began quietly, though my inner turmoil was evident. "But something is out there, something not of this world. I urge everyone, secure your homes, lock your doors, and never venture out alone after dark." A concerned local asked, "But what about the wildlife patrols?" "We have no indication that ordinary animals are responsible. These attacks are different," I replied firmly. "Andy, Claudia, and I will patrol around the clock." Yet as dawn broke over a snow-covered Frostford, an unsettling realization gripped the town. The nightmare had only just begun. That night was colder than any before, a cold that froze breath mid-air. The sky was void of the moon, with only distant stars offering a feeble glimmer. In my cramped office, poring over topographical maps of northern Maine, I searched for any pattern in the disappearances when suddenly the power at the station went out. The familiar hum of the heater died, and the building fell silent. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the corridor where Andy and Claudia were already waiting. "Everything's dark," Claudia murmured, her breath visible in the frigid air. "There are reports of strange movements along the northern edge of town." "Then we move immediately," I commanded, reaching for my service weapon. "I'm heading to the Summers house. Take your arms." We split up. I drove toward the Summers' modest home on the outskirts, where the frozen cliffs of the creek gave way to the dense, foreboding forest. Upon arrival, I noticed the front door gently swaying in the wind. Inside, the place was eerily abandoned, a half-prepared dinner still on the kitchen table, and the back door violently ripped from its hinges. Outside, a trail of blood beckoned me. I followed the bloody trail as it wove a macabre line through the fresh snow, each step robbing me of warmth. The wind carried faint, whispering voices, as if the town itself held its breath, waiting for the next unspeakable horror. The trail led to a small clearing at the edge of the frozen creek, where jagged ice plates lay scattered. There, amidst the pristine white, lay Hannah. Hannah's body was twisted, her face hidden, and her limbs brutally mangled. Her clothing was torn, and thick bloodstains marred the snow, a scene that echoed reports from similar cold case mysteries in the region. Though her shallow breaths betrayed a struggle for life, her final moments were etched in tragedy. I rushed to her side, carefully turning her over to reveal her wide, terrified eyes filled with pure, unadulterated fear. A weak, raspy groan escaped her before an unnatural gurgle silenced her forever. A part of her throat was missing. "Help," she whispered, her broken hand clinging to my arm with desperate strength. It's still here." But she could say no more. Her eyes glazed over, and her hand fell limply. A surge of helpless anger and sorrow overwhelmed me as I scanned the scene. There was no trace of an attacker, only the dreadful pools of blood and a sinister feeling of being watched. I immediately radioed Andy and Claudia. "I've found Hannah. She's gone. Whoever or whatever did this is dangerously close." "We're on our way," Andy responded, his voice hollow. "Hold your position." There was no time to waste, not with the sense that this malevolent force was relentlessly pursuing us. When Andy and Claudia arrived, the wind had picked up, howling like a vengeful spirit through the deserted streets. We wrapped Hannah's body in a tarp, the cold and horror plunging us into grim silence. Andy was visibly shaken. He had already seen Sam's store, and the weight of these brutal scenes was almost too much to bear. "We have to stop this creature," Claudia whispered, her voice trembling. "But what the hell is it?" Andy muttered, his eyes cast downward. "I don't know exactly," I replied, "but it's hunting us. Not out of hunger alone, but with a twisted, sadistic pleasure, as if it revels in our torment." The next morning, an uproar gripped Frostford. In a state of panic, residents had ransacked Sam's store and barricaded their homes, arming themselves with everything from antique hunting rifles to makeshift knives. The streets lay desolate. Only the occasional snowmobile traversed the frozen asphalt, while unseen terror lurked behind every corner. Neighbors whispered of dark legends and unsolved disappearances, uncertain of which monstrous force they were hiding from. Only that something was out there, and it would strike again. Together, Andy, Claudia, and I went door to door, trying to calm our neighbors and assure them that we were doing everything possible. Yet the fear had taken deep root. At one house, Mrs. Klug, an elderly widow clutching an old shotgun, opened the door. "Don't let this happen, Chief," she pleaded, eyes wide with terror. "At night I hear something scratching at my walls." I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Mrs. Klug, we're doing all we can. Please, stay inside, lock your doors, and don't go out alone. We will put an end to this nightmare." Even as I spoke these words, I knew we were facing an enemy that defied all ordinary logic. That night, sleep eluded me as images of the brutal events replayed relentlessly in my mind. I kept wondering what kind of creature could be tormenting us. At first, I suspected a stray animal, a wolf perhaps, lost in the dense forest. But as the hours passed, the thought crystallized. This was something supernatural, a devilish beast, reminiscent of the legends passed down in hushed tones by the older generations of Maine. The following day, as I sat at my desk staring out at the endless darkness, the radio crackled to life. Claudia's voice broke through. "Thomas, I've spotted movement near the old school building. I'm going to check it out." "Wait for backup," I ordered, hastily grabbing my coat. "I'm coming immediately." When I reached the dilapidated school, a building abandoned for years and long considered cursed by the locals, it was already too late. The door hung crookedly on its rusted hinges, creaking ominously in the cold wind. Inside, my flashlight revealed deserted hallways thick with the dust of decades. "Claudia?" I called, but no answer came. I pressed further, every step on the creaking floorboards echoing like the footsteps of ghosts. Suddenly, a deep, guttural growl emerged from one of the dark corridors, a sound that froze the blood in my veins. With trembling hands, I raised my weapon and inched toward the source. At first, I thought it was merely a trick of shadows and light, but then a shape began to form. I was staring into the eyes of a living nightmare. It was a gigantic, sinister creature with fur as white as the snow. Yet something was off. Its eyes were deep, hollow, and glowed with an unnatural hunger. It moved on all fours, its massive paws ending in claws as sharp as daggers. Blood clung to its snarling muzzle, and in its eyes I saw a calculated, almost human malice. I stood frozen as the creature, this devilish wolf, fixed its gaze on me. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause, until it suddenly lunged with a speed I'd never witnessed. I fired my weapon, but the first shot barely slowed it. The beast attacked with wild fury, tearing at my clothing and sending me sprawling to the floor. In the ensuing struggle with this supernatural predator, I managed to break free enough to fire again. 2 shots struck the creature, and it let out a pained howl. It staggered briefly, yet its rage only seemed to intensify. As I struggled to rise, its black eyes flashed with a cunning that chilled me to the core, as if it anticipated my every move. The force of its assault shook the ground, and I felt the oppressive weight of winter's darkness close in as the monster advanced. In that moment, I realized we had no chance of defeating it in an open confrontation. I needed a plan, and fast. "We have to lure it into the station and take it down there," I shouted over the deafening roar of its approach. "But how?" whispered Claudia as Andy ducked for cover beside me. "We use our surroundings," I replied, scanning the snowbound streets. "The station's thick brick walls and reinforced structure might be our only hope. If we can force it inside, we can ambush it." We quickly devised a plan. With loud gunshots and frantic radio calls, we intended to force the devilish wolf out of hiding. The streets were eerily empty. Residents had long since barricaded themselves indoors, leaving us alone with the grim remnants of past tragedies. When we reached the main street, Andy fired a shot into the air, its echo ringing through the frozen silence. For a moment, everything stilled. Then, in the distance, came a low, menacing growl. The devilish wolf was on its way. "Get ready," I said, my heart pounding as I gripped my weapon. The monstrous sound drew closer. Each heavy step left deep prints in the fresh snow. In no time, the creature emerged, its snow-white fur blending with the winter landscape, its glowing black eyes fixated on us with unyielding malice. With an ear-splitting roar, the devilish wolf charged, and we sprinted toward the police station as fast as our weary bodies would allow. Behind us, I could hear its pounding steps and the terrifying scrape of claws on frozen asphalt. We barely made it inside, with Andy and Claudia close behind. I slammed the door shut, and almost immediately the beast crashed against it, its claws gouging deep scars into the station's sturdy facade. "We need to hold it here," I commanded, as the wolf relentlessly battered the door. Hours passed in a tense stalemate. The devilish wolf circled the building, scratching at the door and occasionally making the metal shudder. In the secured main room, silence reigned. Andy sat near a window with his weapon trained on the door, while Claudia paced anxiously. "We're running out of time," Claudia whispered, glancing between her notes and the quivering door. "We must find a way to trap it, or better yet, eliminate it," I said, my mind racing for a solution. Then a desperate idea struck me. In a remote corner of the station stood an old, rusty propane tank, a relic from when the station still boasted a backup generator during past winter crises. It was our final, desperate hope. "Claudia, hide in the crawl space," I ordered firmly, retrieving the tank. "I'll distract it and bring the tank close. Once it's near, I'll ignite it. The monster must burn to die." Claudia hesitated only a moment before crawling into a narrow service passage, and I stood alone facing the creature. No sooner had I positioned the tank than the devilish wolf burst through the door once again. Its wild eyes, filled with malicious hunger, locked onto me. With trembling hands, I hurled the propane tank toward the onrushing beast and squeezed the trigger of my shotgun. An ear-splitting blast and a massive explosion engulfed the room, fire and debris flying as the force slammed me against the wall. For agonizing seconds, all was smoke, heat, and chaos. When the smoke finally cleared, I saw the disfigured creature writhing in flames, the devilish wolf, letting out one last agonized howl as the inferno consumed its monstrous form. It was over. With heavy, labored steps, I emerged from the station into the bitter dawn, meeting Claudia outside, trembling and exhausted. Together, we gazed at the charred ruin of our once sturdy refuge, the scent of burnt flesh and shattered metal mingling with the biting chill of a new winter morning. "You did it! You actually killed it," she whispered, her eyes reflecting both relief and sorrow. I nodded silently, the burden of all our losses, Carl, Sam, and so many others, still weighing on me. Yet, as the first weak rays of sunlight crept over the snow-covered landscape of northern Maine, a lingering unease remained. The horror that had besieged Frostford was not so easily banished. What if there were more creatures like this out there? Beings lurking in the dark, hidden corners of our forests, waiting to resurface. The long, dark nights of winter had irrevocably changed our town, and as the residents slowly resumed their lives and the investigation continued, with files that would later be referenced by local historians, I knew deep down that this was only the prelude to a nightmare that would test us all. The next winter was already looming, and I, Detective Thomas Berger, along with my team, would have to remain ever vigilant should the devilish wolf, or something even more dreadful, return to haunt us. In Frostford, Maine, the line between reality and legend had finally blurred, leaving an indelible scar on our community's history.